Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Met a Broken Minato Part 5. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Something has changed, Sarutobi said as he looked at the map of how the forces in Konoha were now spread out. The Iwa forces were still moving back slowly as the defending Konoha Nin took back their village, but Sarutobi wasn't paying attention to that. The change in the Aim-Gakure lines was the new thing that caught his eye. All reports said that the Aim Nin had gotten back together, stopped helping the Iwa forces, and gathered around the Hokage Tower. The way the troops were spread out was clearly defensive, and there was no sign that they were getting ready to try to take over more territory. With the Konoha forces moving forward, the AIM forces would soon be completely separated from their allies, making both sides more vulnerable. The invaders should have avoided that at all costs, according to tactical logic. Unless, Sarutobi thought with a cold hand on his heart, AIM's tactical goals had changed. The old Hokage looked at the circle on the map that showed the tower and asked, "Have there been any strange chakra signatures coming from the AIM lines?" The assistant next to him fumbled as he looked through the day's many reports. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rustling of the reports that were already crumpled. "Yes," said the Chunin, looking over a piece of rice paper before handing it to Sarutobi. He had a bandage on the other hand and tied it close to his side. He had been hurt in battle, so all he could do now was help the Hokage sort through papers. But all that came from the tower was a small chakra flare. Sarutobi looked at the paper and felt his heart tighten with fear. The chakra levels in the report, which were recorded in detail by Konoha's best censor, weren't out of the ordinary. But the fact that most of the chakra was in one place was scary. The lower floors of the Hokage Tower were shielded so that chakra from the secret experiments and activities wouldn't leak out and bother the general public or bring up questions that didn't need to be asked. If the tower and shields were broken, any chakra activity in the lower levels would start to leak through in low levels. It was very scary that their sensors could pick up anything from the tower that was close to a normal level of chakra. The Hokage turned his attention back to the map and looked at the line where the Iwa and AIM forces met. He wished Shikaku was there so they could talk, but the famous strategist was checking on the situation on the ground at the moment. When the Jounin commander came back, he would have to tell Shikaku what had happened. "Have our forces put pressure on this point between Iwa and AIM. We'll drive a wedge between them and separate them. Keep the Iwa troops in check, but pay attention to the AIM lines." They had to get as fast as they could to the tower. Conan woke up in a dark, empty jail cell. It was clear that she had been taken, but it took a moment to figure out how. Waking up felt like waking up from a deep sleep, or more like waking up after being knocked out. That, along with the fact that she felt a little dizzy and lost, made her think she had been caught in a genjutsu. Conan scowled at the wall and scolded herself in her head. Few people could catch her in this kind of attack. But she hadn't planned on facing a Uchiha, especially Uchiha Itachi. That was the risk of going into a fight without knowing what your enemy was good at. Conan sighed and yelled at herself even more. She knew there were risks. She should have told Nagato about them straight away. But it wouldn't have helped. He was just as aware of the danger as she was, and he was right. They needed the Kyuubi, and the attack on Konoha might have been their only chance to get it. During the battle, Conan thought for a short time that they were going to win. It was going so well at first. The ANBU guards watching the mirror had no idea how strong pain was, and they were even luckier because one of them knew where the Kyuubi was. Ninjendo was able to take their information and their spirit with ease. Then they just had to hide their chakra along the way while the distraction got everyone's attention. Before they met Itachi, they were doing that. Now, though, she wondered if it would be possible to catch the demon fox, given all the defenses around it. If it had been anyone else, she would have said no, but Nagato had never failed at anything he tried. He could do it if anyone could. Conan forced herself to stand up with her still awake limbs and walk around the small cell. The first short lap was to warm up her legs, and the second was to check out the room. Neither the door nor the walls had any windows. The only light in the small room came from a small crack under the door. It made its way into the darkness and gave the bed she had just woken up on the barest outline. The light was too dim to see the walls well, but Conan was sure that they had seals on them that blocked chakra. She felt along the door and found a small opening that could be used to eat or talk through the metal barrier. She lay back down on the small bed and thought about what was going on. They had taken away all of her things and given her a prisoner's shirt and pants to wear. In the dim light, she couldn't find any suppressant seals on her body, and she was pretty sure that the chakra seals for the cell wouldn't reach into the hallway. They wouldn't want to make it harder for their own guards to keep the prisoners in line. It meant that Conan would have to find a way out of the cell without chakra, unless she could find a way around the seals. Once she was out, she could use her techniques again. She might be able to do something small if she could reach through the door. The slot couldn't be opened from the inside because there was no latch. Most likely, it was locked so that any prisoner who tried to open it couldn't. All of this meant that Conan's best chance to get away was when they took her out to question her. She knew too much useful information for them not to ask her questions. After that, she would just have to get into the Hokage Tower and back to her own world through the mirror. Even though the idea of getting the Kyuubi on her own was appealing, it was not possible. The idea of being able to get back to Nagato was also not possible, but it had more potential than the first idea. Her first goal was to get out of the prison where she was being kept. Conan waited for her chance, looking around the cell for any weak spots she might have missed before. When Kakashi opened his eyes again, the first thing he saw was that he was in a new room. Based on how big the ceiling was, it was bigger than the first one. Even though moving was still hard and painful, it wasn't as hard as his first fuzzy memories of waking up. When he heard the sound of scroll paper rustling, he thought for a moment that he should have noticed that there was someone else in the room right away. He had to work hard, but he was able to turn his head toward his friends in the end. A very bandaged Jiraiya was sitting in the bed next to him. He was sitting up with the help of pillows, and his long, white hair was loose around his shoulders. The older man looked at the scroll in his lap with a frown. It took him a moment to realize that Kakashi was looking at him and look up from the scroll. "Well, look who's awake again," Jiraiya said with a sincere smile on his tired face. "Jiraiya-sama," Kakashi said in the half-croak he had been using since waking up. He had heard that the Toad Sage had come back to Konoha to help fight the invasion, but he hadn't seen it for himself. Kakashi stopped and thought, didn't Tsunade-sama say that this was the other Konoha? Kakashi squeezed his eyes shut and brought one heavy hand up to rub them. He was only vaguely aware of what he was doing. "You're still a little confused," Jiraiya said in a deep voice that could be heard from the bed next to hers. "This is a different version of Konoha. In this one," Kakashi croaked. Yes, because he didn't want the man to say anything else. He thought of Rin standing in the doorway, and he didn't want to hear any more. He was just starting to understand how painful his situation was, and he didn't want to hear any more. There was a moment of silence while Kakashi tried to keep himself under control. Jiraiya spoke softly to break the silence. "They locked you up here so I can watch you." Kakashi took advantage of the lighter tone as he finally returned to his usual lack of interest and pulled his hand away from his face. "As if you were the type to talk," he said, looking at the bandages that covered most of Jiraiya's body. Jiraiya took a deep breath and turned his nose up and away. He smoothed out the scroll that was on his lap and looked back at the seal diagrams that were on it. "Unlike you, I'm a model prisoner, patient, trying to get out of bed after having my chakra severely drained and being impaled." 2 steps stopped in front of their room. Jiraiya threw his blanket over the scroll and sat down on his pillows with a startled gasp as the door to their room opened and Tsunade walked in. "You're awake, good," Tsunade said, moving to Kakashi's bedside. She picked up the chart and notes that were hanging from the bed frame and flipped through the pages with a frown. "That stunt you did earlier didn't do you any good. I've been tempted to keep you sedated to give your body time to recover before your mind gets any more unexpected surprises." Kakashi tried hard to sit up, but when Tsunade gave him a look, he gave up. "I feel much better than I thought I would," he said, and he was telling the truth. In reality, he thought he was going to die a few days ago, so anything better than that was a plus. Tsunade nodded and pointed to some green crystals on seals that were set up around the bed. Kakashi blinked and saw them for the first time. He scolded himself for making a mistake. Tsunade put the chart back on the bed and said, "Those are chakra crystals. They give off a low level of healing chakra in the area. It helps the body recover faster from exhaustion and overdoing it, like you have. But the hole in your middle will still have to heal slowly, so don't think you can get out of bed and move around. If I have to, I'll tie you down," Jiraiya said with a stern nod, "and she means it." "You, too," Tsunade growled as she turned to glare at Jiraiya, her hair whipping around her shoulders. The old man moved away from the look, his eyes widening. "Now," Tsunade said, turning back to Kakashi, "you're going to have to convince me that you won't do anything stupid, like get out of bed or collapse, if I'm going to let people visit." Kakashi wasn't sure how many people could visit him in a different world he had never been to before, but Rin and Naruto were there. At least 2 people did that. So, he nodded his head and looked like he meant it. "I'll be fine." Tsunade stood at the foot of the bed and looked at him. Her arms were crossed just below her big chest. She said, "I don't think so," but she didn't say anything else. Jiraiya looked back and forth between Kakashi and Tsunade as he asked, "Is that why you got out of bed?" Because he saw someone. Kakashi hesitated to answer because he didn't want to explain why seeing Rin made him feel so bad. But he didn't have to because Tsunade was already nodding. Tried to get to Rin but passed out after taking one look at Rin. Rin? Jiraiya's smile showed that he knew the answer. You love her, boy, you. Is it a serious relationship in your world? No, wait. The invasion split you up, and you didn't know if she was alive or dead, the old writer said with a grin as he twisted his hands together. I can picture it now. I might even use it as the plot for my next book. Don't worry, I'll change the name so no one will know it's you. What? Kakashi stared at Jiraiya with wide open eyes. Ignore him, Tsunade told the old man with a roll of her eyes and a glare. He's been stuck in here for too long, but he's still not well enough for us to kick him out. She then turned her attention back to Kakashi. Because of how you came to be in this world, your presence here is a state secret. But I'll let the Hokage know that he and a few other people will be able to visit now. Thank you, Kakashi said. He closed his wide eyes and tried hard to make his face look normal. He thought for a moment before asking, who is the Hokage here? There was a long pause while the medical nin measured him with her eyes, as if she could tell how healthy he was just by looking at him. At the moment, Namikaze Minato is the Yondaime Hokage. Kakashi tried even harder to keep his face calm. He was only able to do it because he wore a mask. He should have known that would happen. Just before he passed out during the battle, he had a vague memory of the yellow flash flying by. He thought it was a dream, but it was probably Minato running as fast as the yellow flash had ever been to close the portal. Kakashi was thinking about the same thing over and over when Tsunade spoke again. He might come by in a day or two to see you and ask some questions, so it's good that you know ahead of time. It'll be less of a shock, I guess. As it is, you'll only be able to have the Hokage, Naruto, Rin, and your counterpart if you think you can handle it as visitors for now. Hopefully, you won't fall all over yourself again. I didn't faint, Kakashi said. People were really making too much of the fact that he passed out after seeing Rin. Tsunade rolled her eyes and walked toward the door, her heels clicking on the tiles as she went. Rest up, lover boy. You're still getting better. Kakashi said, I'm not a lover boy, but the door had already closed behind the medic. Jiraiya just laughed from the bed next to him. Jiraiya grinned and said, I think it's too late to protest. Well, at least I don't have to worry about Tsunade-sama, Kakashi said as he pointedly looked at the scroll that was still hidden under Jiraiya's blanket. The older man just shrugged and pulled out the forbidden thing. Jiraiya turned back to the scroll. She's scary. You haven't seen how scary she can be, so I don't want to hear it. Kakashi knew that the Sannin medic could be scary, but he was sure that he had never been unlucky or careless enough to earn the woman's real anger. He would trust Jiraiya's word. There was silence in the room, except for the sound of Jiraiya's scroll and a pen against paper. Kakashi tried to picture what it would be like if Minato-sensei came up to him. When he last saw the man, it was the day the Kyuubi attacked. Then, there was also Rin. How could he explain why he had responded so strongly? He really didn't want to think about his counterpart, who he would have been if he had grown up in a happier world. This felt like a dream, and he was still too out of it to figure out what was going on. Kakashi looked up at the ceiling and asked, Is the village safe? Jiraiya said, The village is safe. What about the mirror? Right now, you don't need to worry about any of that, the old Sannin said in a calm way. Now is a good time to rest. Kakashi sighed and moved around before closing his eyes to get more sleep. Pain stooped over the pile of scrolls and papers on the Hokage's desk. He reached for another book and slammed it down next to him as he frowned at what he was reading. In a flurry of paper, a stack of messages from the Iwa commander fell to the ground. Most of them had never been opened or read, and Pain had only skimmed the ones he did look at. He didn't care if Iwa's position got worse or if the city stayed around in the long run. The goal of the invasion had been met. Not only had Konoha's power been greatly reduced, but so had Iwa's, especially after the Konoha forces finally drove them out of the city. These were two of the three main forces that posed a threat to Indicure and Pain. The Kyuubi would keep everyone else in check, but he had a new goal that was more important than anything else. This was what made him search through papers and theories so quickly. He had to go find Konan. Pain couldn't stand to lose the only person he still thought of as family. Jiraiya-sensei had left them, and his parents were gone. Yahiko had also left. He had nothing else but Konan. He had to stop blaming himself for sending her on such a risky mission in the first place. He should have thought that the fourth Hokage, who made the mirror, would have a way to break the link between the two worlds. The Kyuubi was important, and he knew that the only way to get rid of it was to send one of his paths on the mission. However, he should have sent another path of Pain instead of Konan. He could always find new bodies for the paths, but he could never replace his childhood friend. And now she had been caught. Minato looked down at the papers and charts and wished that something else would jump out of them. Anything that would help him open the mirror again or even make a new one if that was the only way. He made a mistake when he opened the mirror before he fully understood what it was. He didn't usually make mistakes, but they were so close to the Kyuubi and its vast and unique supply of chakra. Pain stopped for a moment and looked away from the scroll in front of him. Chakra was the only thing that made the mirror work. Pain pushed aside some papers and pulled out the chakra diagram he had made of the mirror. His eyes ate up the diagram with a frantic focus. The crystal itself was what made the connection between the two worlds. In a way, there was only one mirror, and the worlds were like two sides of a window that grew out of it. The amount of chakra that went through the crystal was the only thing that made the connection work or not. For the mirror to open, there had to be a certain amount. This was easy to see and understand. The crystal was made to handle a lot of chakra because it took a lot of chakra just to make a visible connection. The seal that the Yondaime used to shut down the mirror used even more chakra to overpower the same systems and shut them down right away. But what if Pain put a tiny bit of chakra into the mirror? All Pain really needed to do was reopen the chakra paths, and a slow, steady stream of chakra might just coax the channels open again. Pain got a new piece of paper and was ready to write down his plan. It would take a long time, more time than he wanted. There was also the question of how he would get Konan and the Kyuubi back from a world where the Yondaime Hokage was in charge of protecting it. If the choice came down to one or the other, Pain knew he wouldn't be able to leave Konan behind. Still, that decision would come after he could open the portal again. Any plan he devised later would have to start with opening a door back into that other world, and time was of the essence. Chakra was the key to fixing the mirror, and Pain had a lot of it. Minato was focused on the job at hand, holding a paintbrush in one hand and a can of paint made with chakra in the other. It was nice to take a break and work on something simple for a while instead of trying to figure out what was going on in a very complicated situation. Even when a gasp came from behind him, his hand didn't move as it traced the outline of the seal. When Minato was done with the complicated design, he looked back at the bed and smiled as he moved to a new spot on the wall. "Sorry if I woke you up," he told Kakashi, whose eyes were wide open. Jiraiya was sleeping peacefully across the room, and he was making a soft snoring sound. Minato thought that Tsunade might be giving her fellow Sannin a drug to keep him in bed. "It's okay, Hokage-sama," Kakashi said in a soft, uncertain voice, his eyes never leaving Minato's face. "I probably should have warned you more. This must have come as a surprise to you." Minato looked at his student's partner and saw that his face was still pale and tight. For Kakashi, this must have been like seeing a ghost. Minato remembered how he felt the first moment he realized who Naruto was. Shocked was probably an understatement. Even with that, Minato thought Kakashi looked better than the last time he saw him. "It's okay," Kakashi said over and over again, pulling his eyes away to frown at his knees. "Tsunade-sama told me you were Hokage, but I don't think any amount of warning would have helped." Minato tried to make the silver-haired man laugh by saying, "At least you didn't faint like you did when you saw Rin-san. Tsunade would have thrown me out." However, the silver-haired man only gave a weak smile. For a moment, there was an awkward silence, and then Minato asked, "How do you feel?" "Better than I would have thought," Kakashi said as he carefully pushed himself up to sit. "I think that's because of Tsunade's chakra therapy." Minato nodded, happy that he had given the doctor so much support and freedom. When he first backed Tsunade and grew the village's medical division, he got a lot of pushback from the old warhorses. The move had been expensive at first, and it took people away from other departments who were needed there. But when innovations like chakra therapy proved their worth, he was glad he hadn't listened to the doubters. Minato asked, "Are you in the mood to answer a few questions? You want to know how everything started and what is going on now?" Kakashi said. As a skilled ninja with a sharp mind, he knew exactly what Minato needed to know. Minato nodded and looked at the door to make sure Tsunade wasn't coming back. Tsunade would disapprove. Kakashi needed more time to rest, but they were running out of time, and Minato knew Kakashi was strong. The man with white hair could handle it. Minato had trained this man, no matter what universe he came from. Kakashi was quiet for a moment as he could be seen putting his thoughts together. "It started more than a year ago when we got information about an underground criminal group called Akatsuki. The information didn't seem strange at first. It was just rumors about a new gang trying to make a name for themselves. Then, our operatives working on the case started going missing. There were reports of attempts to get information on the Biju, not just one or two from a specific nation, but all of them, and the Kyuubi." Minato asked Kakashi, how well known was it that Naruto was the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki? He didn't want to interrupt, but he was eager to learn anything he could about his son. The silver-haired man shook his head in a small, painful way, but it was better than what he could do a few days ago. The Sandaime made the information a class secret and told everyone in the village, especially Naruto, not to talk about it. He had hoped that Naruto's peers and those who came after them wouldn't inherit the prejudice that came with the knowledge, but Minato finished for him, grimacing to himself. They still learned to shun him in front of their parents, even though they didn't know why. No matter how well-meaning a law was, it couldn't change the way people are. Kakashi closed his eyes and drew a frown on his face to show that he agreed. Minato shook himself awake and listened again. He looked at the wall again before giving up on the idea of painting any more seals while they talked. Please continue. We heard that Iwa was moving their troops around more, Kakashi said, picking up where he left off. At first, we thought it was training, something to keep an eye on but nothing to be too worried about. Then, the units disappeared from our surveillance, and the next time we saw them, they were at the edge of the village. Minato pressed his eyes shut and pinched the bridge of his nose with the hand that wasn't holding the paint can and brush. No leader wanted to be in that situation, where a large military force suddenly showed up at their gates with little or no warning. It was a nightmare. What did they manage to take from the village? Kakashi ran an exhausted hand through his hair, which was already a mess. When I left, they had the Hokage Tower, the front gate, and the hospital. At the high water mark, they controlled about 60% of the village, but we've been making progress. They might have even taken back the main gate by now. Minato shook his head and walked to the chair next to the bed. He put the paint can on the floor and put the brush on top of it. Then, he put his elbows on his knees and leaned forward. How many people have died because of you? Too many, was the short answer. Kakashi took a deep breath before going on in a calm voice. We got the civilians into shelters as quickly as we could. There's been a lot of talk about moving them out of the village entirely, but we don't have the manpower to protect them, and there's a fear that the enemy will attack them on the road to draw our troops away from the front lines. The higher level shinobi have mostly survived with only minor injuries and fatigue, but the junior ranks, they just weren't ready for all-out war. It's been so long since we... Minato looked at Kakashi and said, you don't need to explain. I understand. Minato's own Konoha hadn't been at war in 10 years. They still trained new shinobi as well as they could. And maybe even better now that they didn't have to send their kids out into battle right away. But training only went so far, and most shinobi today get their hands on experience from patrolling, fighting criminals, and fighting one-on-one, not from full-scale battles between armies. The way people thought was just different and more harsh. Minato asked, is there any sign the enemy will send more help? If they did, could you stop them? He needed to know everything about what was going on. Kakashi frowned and said, I don't think they'll be able to send in any more troops. The invading forces are from Iwagakure and Aimgakure. The Iwa forces seem to have the upper hand, but the tower is held by Aim's troops. Kakashi looked around for a moment, and Minato, knowing what he needed, found a piece of paper for him. At first, they were working together, but in the last few days, our intelligence has told us that the AIM forces have been focused on holding the tower and nothing else, even though the Iwa troops have been losing some ground. Kakashi said as he drew a picture of the city and the front lines as they were the last time he knew. When the invading forces got a foothold in the city and it became clear that we wouldn't be able to push them out right away, the Sandaime ordered some of our forces to gather the patrols and form a line to stop any enemy reinforcements from getting through. This made defending against the invasion a little harder in the short term. But we can't let the enemy get any relief. Minato gave a nod as he looked at the map and the way Kakashi's village was set up. No matter how you looked at it, the situation was bad. But if Kakashi was right and Iwa's forces were starting to lose ground, the other Konoha might still be saved. The Sandaime thought the invasion had at least two goals, Kakashi said after a short pause. One was to weaken our military, which they did, and the other was to get the Kyuubi. Minato agreed that they were still trying to do that. He put the map on the table next to the bed, got up from the chair, and went back to the next spot on the wall that needed a seal. I'm going to move Naruto here for now because the house needs work and I don't have enough shinobi to take care of him with the extra patrols, repairs, and injured. Minato finished making the seal and moved to the next place. He'll probably be bouncing off the walls by the end of the day, Minato said. At least, he was hoping Naruto would be bouncing off the walls until a better solution could be found. That would be better than the boy's half-depressed mood, which had been getting worse since he found out about the Kyuubi. When the silence went on longer than he thought it would, he looked back. Kakashi's eyes were on the table in front of him, but he was looking a million miles away. As he swallowed, his Adam's apple moved a few times, and then he cleared his throat. "We'll take care of him, sensei," Kakashi said in a quiet voice that was almost a whisper. When he woke up, he looked paler than he did now. Minato's face was full of worry, and he was tempted to ask what had happened to Kakashi since his partner had died, but he stopped himself. Kakashi had always been shy, but this one seemed to be even more so. Minato threw a weak smile over his shoulder and said, "I know you will." He then turned back to his seal. "I'll put guards here to watch over you three, so if an enemy comes after you, let them handle it. You and Jiraiya should focus on getting yourselves and Naruto to safety. Neither of you are in any shape to fight if you can help it." "Hi, Hokage-sama," Kakashi said, voice subdued. "You should know that Naruto has been having trouble with the Kyuubi's chakra since coming here. I won't go into all the details, but in this world, the Kyuubi was temporarily dispersed, leaving behind its latent chakra. The chakra is being drawn to Naruto and entering through his seal, making it hard for him to control the Kyuubi. These seals help control the problem, and I'll leave you both plenty of chakra suppressant seals in case you need the safe area." Kakashi agreed. "We've had more than our fair share of bad luck." His voice was just above a whisper, and then he yawned loudly. "Get some sleep," Minato said. He didn't need to say that because he could already hear Kakashi breathing behind him. A few hours later, Minato was in the lower floors of the Hokage Tower, looking at the broken mirror and thinking about what Kakashi had said about what happened on the other side. He ran his hand lightly over the black glass, barely touching the uneven cracks on the mirror's surface. Grabbing a light, he turned it one way and then the other as he bent down to look at the damage from all sides. In some ways, the natural light that came through the hole in the ceiling and wall made it harder for him to fully look at the mirror because it washed out the brighter artificial lights. He made up for it by stealing some of the very bright surgical lamps from the hospital. He was lucky that there were enough spares for him to use. Cracks spread out from Minato's experimental seal and broke up the blurry image that the inactive mirror was reflecting. With everything going on with Kakashi's double and Naruto's thing, as well as his son and the village, Minato hadn't had a chance to look at the damage in detail until that moment, almost 2 days after it happened. The cracks weren't deep or wide enough to break the mirror in half, but they were still big enough to make the dull image reflected back look like a kaleidoscope of shapes. Minato frowned as he looked at the bigger cracks. Some of them were sharp enough to cut, but there was more going on underneath the surface. Minato closed his eyes and pressed his palm flat against the broken crystal. He stopped moving for a moment and put his hand on the mirror. With the seal he had made, the chakra crystal should be as inert as any other rock picked up off the ground. The flow of chakra should be stopped, and it shouldn't be able to move through the channels until the seal is broken. That is, if the method worked the way it was meant to. Everything was so new and untested, from the mirror to the different seals made to control it, that no one could be sure how anything would work. After a while, Minato could feel it. Sitting still and looking only at the mirror in his hand, he could just make out the faintest trace of chakra running deep beneath the surface. It was very faint and could have been missed on a quick look, but it was there, moving along the cracks where his seal had broken. Even though the feeling was so weak that it felt more like an echo, he could still tell that the chakra was not his own. At first, it didn't look like the faint chakra pulse was doing anything. The looking glass was made to work with a much larger flow of power, but appearances can be deceiving. Even though it didn't look like it was doing anything, that didn't mean it was safe. When Minato looked at the mirror again, he couldn't find anything that could explain the faint traces of chakra. This meant that the flow of chakra was probably coming from the other side and the enemy. Minato sat back on his heels and glared at the dangerous threat that used to be a science project. Even when it wasn't working, the mirror was still a problem. There was still a strong desire to break the mirror, but there was also a strong desire to help the other Konoha. The other Kakashi came next. He should have at least been given a chance to try to go back to his world if that was what he wanted. Pain was planning his next move in the other world. It was likely another attempt to get the Kyuubi and get Konan back from Minato's Konoha, where he was being held as a prisoner. There wasn't enough information to know exactly what technique Pain was trying, but based on what Minato had learned from the other Kakashi, he was sure it was another way to open the doorway between their worlds. Minato couldn't keep waiting for the enemy to act, but he also wasn't ready to destroy the mirror completely. He had to come up with more plans than just protecting Konoha from invasion. Pushing himself up, he turned back toward the stairs in his office. It was time to start going on the attack. The questions won't be this easy for long, the shinobi said with a serious frown. We're giving you a chance to work with us in exchange for less punishment for attacking our village, but if you don't start soon, we'll have to use less pleasant ways to get what we want. The threat didn't scare Konan much. She had grown up during the wars in Aingakure. She had been fighting Hanzo since she was a teen. She had been tortured and taken prisoner before, so she knew what to expect this time. She was still and quiet, and she kept her eyes straight ahead as she watched everyone in the room. She probably wouldn't be able to get out of her cell on her own, so she would have to try to do so in the short time she was outside of it. Even though the current interrogation room isn't as safe as her cell, it would also be hard to work in once they tied her down. They put chakra-blocking cuffs on her wrists and ankles and tied her to a hard wooden chair. The restraints didn't stop her chakra as well as the cell did, but she could never get enough to make a powerful attack. But there was a short time when they were putting her in and taking her out of the chair when she wasn't restrained at all. It was a small window of time, too short for most shinobi to do anything, and it only happened because they didn't think she was as strong as she was. Still, it was enough for the time being. Conan ignored the shinobi sitting across from her questions and threats and focused on shaping the little chakra she could make. When the interrogator got tired of talking and no one answered, he called for the guards to come and take Conan back to her cell. 3 of them walked into the room. 2 of them unlocked her seat, and the third was ready to stop any attack she made. As soon as the first handcuff came off, Conan focused on putting what little chakra she had into the interrogator's papers on the desk. As soon as the second limit was gone, she increased the flow and quickly built more chakra. When the last restraint was taken off her ankle, the guards finally noticed the small flow. The 2 people holding her immediately reacted to the chakra manipulation by slamming her against the table and pulling her arms behind her back so she couldn't make any hand signs. Conan gritted her teeth as a heavy hand pushed her cheek hard against the metal table. They told her to stop, but touching the paper made it easier for her chakra to flow into it. Then the handcuffs snapped over her wrists and the flow of chakra stopped. The difference was very big, and she gasped for a moment as if she had been hit in the stomach. Take her back to her cell, the interrogator growled as he gathered up his papers. After that little stunt, we might move on to the next step even faster. She was pulled back into the hallway by the guards. It took Conan a few steps to get back on her feet and figure out where she was. But once the initial disorientation from being cut off from her chakra so suddenly had worn off, she could feel it. It was small and weak, and you might not have noticed it if you weren't looking for it. But it was there, the clear, almost unconscious link with the papers from the interrogation room. As the guards pushed her back into her cell with her head hung low, Conan forced herself not to smile. How does he feel? Naruto heard a voice through the door that was hard to make out. He turned his head to look at the door and stared at the crack along the bottom of the frame. Even to eat, he hasn't wanted to leave his room. Not even for ramen, Rin said in a low voice that was muffled by the wood, but Naruto could hear it clearly in the quiet, and it made him frown. That wasn't true, at least, not all of it. He wouldn't leave his room and didn't want to eat at first. Rin then sat down in front of his door with 2 bowls of hot miso pork ramen. Naruto eventually opened the door to his room because he could smell something delicious. They ate their meal quietly while sitting on the floor outside the door. Okay, said Minato, and the Hokage sighed into the silence. Naruto leaned against the door to hear what else was being said, but he jumped back when he heard Minato's voice coming from much closer. Minato knocked on the door and asked, Naruto, are you sleeping? Naruto jumped up on the bed when Minato walked in through the door. The last time Naruto saw him, he was wearing a bloody and torn uniform. He had changed clothes since then, but the Hokage still looked rumpled and worn. He was sitting on the bed, and Minato saw him. Dinner time is almost here, why don't you come to the kitchen? Naruto looked suspiciously at the door. Why can't we just eat it here? Minato sighed and fell asleep on the bed. Why don't you want to get out of here? Naruto pointed to the front of the house and said what was obvious. There's a hole in the front wall. What if the Kyuubi's chakra gets in? Minato's face lit up with understanding. Oh, you're worried you'll lose control again, she said. Naruto nodded and gripped the bed's edge. He looked at Minato as the man rubbed his tired face, wanting his father to say that wouldn't happen again. Naruto was tired of being in the room, but he didn't want to hurt his new friends again after seeing what had happened to the enemy shinobi. Minato put an arm around Naruto's back. I won't lie, there is a risk, he said as he pulled Naruto close to him. But it's not a big risk, and there are people here who will watch out for you and everyone else. Naruto let out a huff and looked at his hands. He really wanted to believe Minato, but the thought of the red chakra swirling up to cover him stopped him. Even worse, the nagging feeling in the back of his mind had come back. During the chaos of the battle, he almost forgot about it. But now that things have settled down again, that small feeling that he needed to be somewhere and doing something is back with a vengeance. Naruto didn't know which was worse, being stuck in his room with this restlessness for the rest of his life or being taken over by the demon fox. You have to be brave, Minato told Naruto before giving him a quick squeeze and letting go so Naruto could look down again. A lot of your success in fighting the fox will depend on how determined you are. That made Naruto turn his head and look at his father. But the Kyuubi is too powerful. Minato nodded and said, yes, the Kyuubi is very strong. I think you're stronger, though. You think so? Asked a shocked Naruto. No one had ever told him before that he was strong. He was almost the last person in his class. You still need practice and training, and you have a long way to go in your studies, Minato said. But yes, I don't think the person in your world who put the fox inside of you would have done so if they didn't think you were up to the challenge. Naruto kept quiet as he thought about how the new information fit with everything else he knew. He wanted to be strong, so he practiced every day to be the best in the whole school. But he always seemed to fall short, to fail. Even though he tried hard and bragged and seemed sure of himself, he couldn't change the results of the tests and sparring matches. Naruto, Minato said again, stopping the boy's thoughts from going around and around. You're the son of ninjas, and if there's one thing ninjas can do, it's endure. You'll get through this, get better, master it, and one day beat it. Naruto was quiet for a while, and it seemed like the words were sinking in and giving him more confidence. He looked down at the floor with a serious face as he thought about something Iruka had said in class. It had something to do with how everyone starts out as a beginner at some point and how you shouldn't give up or get frustrated. Do you think I could beat you someday and become Hokage? Minato laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. Instead, it was a warmer, friendlier laugh, and when he smiled, it was full of pride. It made Naruto feel good all the way down to his toes and made him want to try to live up to that pride, beat his father, and know that Minato wouldn't be angry but happy about it. Minato said with a big grin, yes, you could, but you'll have to work hard at it. I won't give up so easily. You have to earn the title of Hokage, you know. That's okay, Naruto said as he rubbed his eyes and smiled at Minato. I can do it, I'm the son of a Hokage. Minato gave a confident nod and said, I know you can. He gave Naruto's shoulder one last squeeze before getting up. Then let's go down and see what's for lunch. After that, I need you to do something for me. Really? Naruto asked, craning his neck back to look at his father as they walked out of the room and down the hall. The Hokage looked down at him out of the corner of his eye, with one side of his mouth curled just a little bit. Someone needs to watch over Jiraiya in the hospital and make sure he doesn't get out of bed and hurt himself. The Kakashi from your world could also use some care. Do you think you can do that? Naruto hesitated for a second, looking at the heavy-duty tarp that was nailed over the holes in the wall. Don't worry about the Kyuubi. I've warded the hospital room, so you won't have to worry about any of that while you're in their room. Minato stopped on the stairs, a few steps below Naruto and almost eye level. I know I can count on you to do this right. Something inside Naruto filled him up. It was like when Minato had said before that he thought Naruto could beat the Kyuubi, but even more so. Now, the Hokage was depending on him. It was almost like a mission, but better. He nodded, his face twitching with a smile that was about to break out. Don't worry, Databio. I'll look after them. 11, Kakashi gasped, looking at Jiraiya with wide eyes. Jiraiya nodded with a proud smile on his face. I'm working on the 12th book right now, but it's going a little slower than the last couple. I need to find some new inspiration, but since Naruto came along, I haven't had the time. His eyes became thoughtful as he looked far away. When this is all over, I should probably book a stay at a spa for a week or two. That should help. 11, Kakashi said to himself once more. In his own world, there were only 4 books in the Ika Ika series, and the mystery, romance, and love triangles were all starting to get interesting. Even though Kakashi hated drama and problems in his own life, he loved reading about them in books. Jiraiya laughed as he lay in his own bed. I see you like it as much as our own Kakashi. Yes, well, Kakashi tried to think of something to say. He had tried to avoid thinking about his counterpart and what it must have been like to live in a world where both Rin and Minato had survived. Dwelling on it was the first step down a very dangerous path of regret and guilt that could leave a person paralyzed. He had seen it happen to other people and was determined not to follow in their footsteps. Luckily, a nurse came into the room at that time. Before closing the door, she gave us a quick look at the hall and the guards standing outside. She smiled in greeting to Kakashi and Jiraiya. Good afternoon, Jiraiya-sama, Kakashi said. How are you both feeling? Good enough to go to lunch with you, my little cherry blossom, Jiraiya told her with a smile. The young nurse turned red and smiled a little bit. I'm sorry, Jiraiya-sama, but Tsunade-sama told me not to push you yet by making you move too much. Jiraiya muttered under his breath. Tsunade always ruins my fun. The nurse made a sound of sympathy and then went to do her job, which included checking the charts, replacing the water pitcher, and changing the bed sheets. Kakashi kept thinking about how slowly he was getting better, even though Tsunade's chakra crystals had helped him at first. While the nurse changed the bed sheets, he held onto the bedside table and tried hard to stay on his own 2 feet. When she was done, the nurse stood by the door and said, "If there's anything you need, please don't be afraid to ask." Kakashi hesitated. He probably shouldn't have asked, but he was going to be stuck in bed for a few more days and it would help pass the time. Also, what was wrong with asking? Well, there is one thing he was still unsure. His instincts told him that this wasn't a good plan. The nurse smiled and walked toward the bed. "Oh, please Kakashi-san, anything at all. I know you've had a hard time. Well, I'm getting bored, so I was wondering if you could pick up the first 6 books in the Ika Ika series for me." Kakashi paused when the nurse's face turned bright red. He had just realized that he didn't have any money to pay for the books and couldn't expect the nurse to buy them with her own money. "You can put them on Juria's account," he added, which was helpful. Kakashi was surprised when the nurse, who was now very red, slapped him. "I'm willing to do almost anything for my patients," she said, "but I won't buy you porn." She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, Juria's deep laughter following her into the hallway. The older man laughed as he regained control of his breathing. "She must be one of Tsunade's apprentices. You're lucky she only gave you a slap for that." You're probably right," Kakashi said, slouching down into the freshly made bed. Maybe he'd be able to get the other books another time. Or maybe he'd be able to take them back with him. Who knew if they would ever be written in his own world, where everything had fallen apart. He thought that the Jiraiya from his world would be too busy running his spy network to write that many books. When Kakashi rolled over, he pulled the sheet over his head. Since he had nothing to read, nothing to do, and not much to say, the best thing he could do at the moment was sleep. Maybe when he woke up again, he'd feel better. By the time Kakashi woke up again, a few hours must have gone by. The sun was coming in from a completely different direction, and there were 2 lunch trays on the rolling bedside tables, one of which had been eaten, and the other of which had not. Kakashi thought that the second lunch was his, but he didn't do anything to get it. One of the side effects of taking too many soldier pills was that he still didn't have a normal appetite. Jiraiya was back in the quiet room working on his seals with a blanket ready to throw over the pens, scrolls, and paper in case a nurse came to check on them. In the quiet room, Kakashi sighed, and the scratching of the older man's pen just barely covered the sound. After always moving, fighting, and working in the fight to take back Konoha, Kakashi didn't like being forced to do nothing. In many ways, he felt more stressed and tense sitting here in a clean bed while his fellow shinobi were fighting for their lives in another world than he would have if he had been with them. Minato-sensei and Naruto just showed up in the middle of the room with the Hiraishin. Minato put his hand on Naruto's shirt collar to keep the boy from falling when he stumbled. Jiraiya's head went up as he threw the blanket over his work with one hand. "Don't worry, sensei," Minato said, making sure Naruto was still before letting go. "I won't tell Tsunade that you were studying seals when you were supposed to be resting." Jiraiya spat out the word as if it was a personal insult. "I've been resting for too long already." He turned around to face his former student head-on. His mouth opened to say more, but a grunt came out instead, and a hand went up to his side. "Tsunade knows what she's talking about when it comes to healing, sensei, and you're not as young as you used to be." Minato smiled and walked over to Jiraiya's bed. He crossed his arms and looked down at the man for a moment before looking at the seals he had put on the wall. Kakashi didn't pay much attention to the conversation because he was focused on Naruto. He hadn't seen the boy since the first night of the attack, so he couldn't help but look Naruto over to see if he was hurt or upset. He had some scratches on his face, but they looked like they had been there for a few days and were almost gone. He looked tired and pale, a lot paler than Kakashi had ever seen anyone. Naruto was always a very active child, and he couldn't keep his energy under control even when he was inside. They must have been trying to keep him from being seen. Naruto turned around and looked around the new room. The initial surprise on his face faded as he saw that it was just a normal hospital room. When he looked at Kakashi, though, his face lit up again. "Kakashi," he jumped on the bed and climbed up to the headboard. "What is wrong with you?" Kakashi said, trying to hide the fact that he was unsure about what Naruto would say to him. Before the invasion, Naruto didn't know who Kakashi was, but now he seemed happy to see him. But it wasn't Kakashi himself who made Naruto his friend. It was the other Kakashi who lived in this world with Rin and Minato. Kakashi fought off a brief feeling of envy. "I think it would be easier to list what didn't happen to me," he joked. At one point, Naruto looked at Kakashi's face with his eyes squinted and looking for something. "You're my world's Kakashi, right?" Kakashi didn't know what else to say, so he nodded. Naruto asked, "What's happened? What's to our Konoha?" With a serious look on his face that Kakashi had never seen him show before. Kakashi noticed how quiet the room was getting. He managed a weak smile and put a hand on the boy's shoulder to reassure him. "Don't worry, Naruto. We're fine. The Sandaime wouldn't let anything bad happen to the village. After hearing that, Naruto's face brightened up again, and he got off the bed and started looking around the room in detail. A quick sideways look at Minato and Jiraiya showed that they both had grim faces, and for a moment, all three adults in the room knew that things in the other Konoha were very bad. First, Minato shook himself out of his dark thoughts. He stopped on his way to the door to put his hand on Naruto's head. I have to go back to my work now. The room, the bathroom next to it, and a small part of the hallway are all warded. If you can help it, try not to leave this suit. Naruto nodded, thought for a second, and then put his arms around Minato's middle. The next smile got rid of any last shadows on Minato's face. Kakashi was taken back to a time before everything went wrong. Like when Minato found out he was going to be a dad, or when he told Kushina they were getting married, as well as all the other happy times in between. Watching hurt, Minato told Naruto, "Keep an eye on them for me," as he pulled away from the hug and rushed out the door. The medical nin frowned at the red-haired corpse in front of him and asked, "Is this one of the invaders?" "Yes," Tsunade said as she looked at the body. The long hair was a scary color, and the body was pale and full of piercings. There was no visible sign of how or why the summoning shinobi died, and there were no visible signs of any injuries. This was strange because Tsunade was sure she had hit the summoning shinobi several times. By controlling their chakra and knowing how to roll with their opponent's attacks, very high-level ninja could avoid major injuries in these fights. However, it was rare for a ninja to come out of a major battle without even a scratch. This body had just died for no apparent reason, and Tsunade was sure that the other two red-haired bodies would be the same when she looked at them. Then there were the famous Rinnegan eyes. Tsunade was sure that looking at these three dead people with red hair was the only way to find out Nagato's weakness and beat him. She didn't think that breaking the mirror would make the world safe for them. What would make it hard for Pain to make another mirror? No, they had to stop the fighting where it started, which meant taking away Nagato's ability to attack in the first place. Minato planned to do just that, but he needed every advantage he could get if he wanted to win. "Shizune, start the autopsy on this person. Don't miss anything, and let me know when you're done," Tsunade told her best and oldest apprentice. Shizune nodded and said, "Hi, Tsunade-sama." She was already getting ready for the autopsy. Tsunade turned to the door and went to do something else, knowing that Shizune would find out whatever secrets the corpse held. They hoped that it would be enough to help them win. Naruto fell asleep in a ball on Kakashi's bed. He had been looking around the room and paying close attention to each seal painted on the walls, floor, and ceiling. Kakashi picked at the lunch that was left for him, but he didn't like how bland it was. Still, it was better than the emergency food they had in his village of Konoha. He sighed, pushed the tray away, and looked down at Naruto, who was slowly taking over the pillows next to him. "Sensei really likes Naruto, doesn't he?" Kakashi asked, remembering the hug and smile. "Really, it's not a big surprise." Jiraiya looked up at Kakashi and then down at Naruto. "Yes, they've become very fond of each other. It's hard to break the bond between a parent and a child." There was a long silence before Jiraiya spoke again. "We won't be giving Naruto back." Kakashi shook his head and looked at the far wall with a narrowed eye. "I don't know how my Konoha will react to that. They won't want to let the Kyuubi go." Jiraiya gave a disgusted snort. "They don't want to lose their weapon, do they?" The older man's tone of mockery made Kakashi turn around, and a sudden need to defend his home made him explain, even though he didn't necessarily agree with their points. "You don't know what we're going through," he said quickly. "More than half of the village has been destroyed. We have more dead than we can bury right now, and many of them are young and middle-ranking shinobi even if we manage to drive out the enemy forces soon. The village is severely weakened. It will take years before we can even hope to get back to where we were before so many of the young were killed." Kakashi stopped and rubbed his face with his hand. Jiraiya kept quiet and let Kakashi take control again. The younger man's voice was steady when he spoke again. "They'll need every advantage they can get to keep our enemies and scavengers away, and as much as I hate to say it, the Kyuubi is a powerful card. Minato won't give up his son," Jiraiya said in a strong, but not accusatory, voice. "And we can't afford to lose the Kyuubi, but we also can't afford another war," Kakashi said as he fell back into his bed. They couldn't agree on anything, and it was taking away what little energy he had managed to get back. As each man thought about the problem, the room fell silent. Kakashi's eyes went back to Naruto's blonde head half buried in a pillow, his short limbs flung all over the place as he slept. Even without the Kyuubi, there was a part of Kakashi that didn't want to give up Naruto. Naruto was the only member of Team Minato who was still related to him. Kakashi felt a sudden sharp pain of regret. It hurt too much, like when he lost his father and Abido. He wished he had done something different, even though he knew he could have and should have. He wished that instead of sometimes following Naruto around in his ANBU mask, he had taken the chance to get to know the boy better. He should have shown Naruto that neither of them had to be alone. It might have made Naruto want to go back to their own village, Konoha. But it was already too late. On their home world, Naruto had no one to care about, except maybe the Sandaime. Kakashi heaved a sigh. He was always figuring things out just a little too late. Jiraiya's voice broke the silence when he said, "Maybe we can both get what we want." Kakashi forced himself to pull himself out of his dark thoughts. He refocused, blinking up at the older man on the other side of Naruto. "What? Do both?" Jiraiya glanced up at Kakashi and looked back down at Naruto. "You can have the Kyuubi, but we'll keep the little brat." Kakashi recoiled at the thought. He had heard what happened to the Jinchuriki whose Biju were taken away. At the thought, he tightened his grip on Naruto, but Jiraiya just smiled at him with a smug twist of the lips. "That's not what I'm thinking," the older man said, crossing his arms over his chest, which was still hurt. "I'm not talking about the Kyuubi itself, but about its chakra. How would your Konoha feel if it got a whole bunch of latent Kyuubi chakra?" When Kakashi realized Jiraiya wasn't going to rip the demon fox out of Naruto, he let out a sigh of relief. Then, as the rest of the idea came to him, he could feel a smile curling up under his mask. That might be the best thing to do. Jiraiya looked back to Naruto, expression turning serious. "There is one catch, though. If we want to catch all of that free-floating chakra, we'll need some bait. So let me get this straight," Tsunade said as she stood at the foot of Kakashi and Jiraiya's beds with one hand on her hip and her head tilted to the side. She looked from one man to the other with a narrow gaze. "You want me to help you use Naruto as a hook to catch the rest of the Kyuubi's chakra so you can give it to the other Konoha as payment for letting us keep Naruto?" "Yes," Jiraiya said with considerably less reluctance than Kakashi felt on the whole matter. Kakashi glanced at Naruto, sound asleep and faintly snoring on a temporary mattress between their two beds. It was lucky the kid slept so soundly. Tsunade gave the old man a mean look, then turned and gave Kakashi the same look. "Did you plan to tell Minato about this? Minato's got so much to take care of right now. We both thought it best not to worry him with trivial details." Jiraiya waved a dismissive hand at the idea. "It's better if he's left to worry about the important things. Besides, he'd be happy to know that we found a way to deal with the loose Kyuubi chakra hanging around." "Don't try to trick me, old man," Tsunade said, crossing her arms. "You don't want a very angry Hokage to beat you half to death." Jiraiya matched his colleague's frown. "We need to give the other Konoha something so they don't go after Naruto." Tsunade replied, "They wouldn't be able to fight us anyway, given how weak they must be now." "Right," Kakashi said when he finally joined the conversation. "We're going to be weak, extremely so. We'll need something to defend ourselves with, or at least dissuade others from attacking us. You know how stupid people can get when they're backed into a corner. They make desperate decisions. We can avoid that by giving them something to grab onto right away. Naruto's not liked by the village, by the council or the villagers, but the council knows the Kyuubi acts as a counterbalance for the other villages' Biju. So we give them the Kyuubi, they'll leave Naruto alone." Tsunade leaned in just enough to avoid showing Jiraiya what she was looking at. This was a move she had been doing for years. She looked at both men and then at the blonde boy sleeping with his arms around his pillow. "Has Naruto given his permission?" "Not yet, but he will," Kakashi said, a tired sigh accompanying the words. "He'll want to do what he can to help. He's always been that way." "Humph," said the medical ninja. She looked at him with a narrowed gaze that made Kakashi feel guilty, whether it was meant or not, for how the village had treated the boy. Turning to Jiraiya, "Do you have a plan? A real plan and not just a vague idea?" The old man jumped back in anger and shock. "Of course I have a plan. Mostly." The doctor raised an eyebrow and looked very unimpressed. "Tsunade." Jiraiya's voice dropped to that level tone of seriousness reserved only for a set of special topics. "What other choice does Naruto have? What kind of life will he have, locked up in protective seals and afraid to go outside all the time? He can't live like that." It was quiet for a long time. Tsunade's gaze drifted to Naruto's sleeping form, expression softening a moment before she drew herself back up. "Fine," she growled. "But we always keep an eye on his health, and if the fox tries to take over, we have a backup plan." Jiraiya nodded and said, "Of course." Even though they had convinced the master medic to go along with the plan, Kakashi still didn't like it. Maybe it was the memory of finding Naruto on that rooftop, cut and bleeding, just a hair's breadth away from being caught by the invading forces. Naruto had already been through so much, now to add facing the Kyuubi to it. If only there was a way for Naruto himself to help, perhaps he would feel more in control in his own situation. How does Naruto protect himself from the Kyuubi's chakra normally? What? Evidently, the conversation had moved on while Kakashi was musing. Both of the Sannin were blinking at him, with Tsunade towering over Jiraiya, who didn't apologize. You said that the seal on Naruto let some of the Kyuubi's chakra leak into the boy's body on purpose, Kakashi said, scolding the boy's slow healing, which seemed to have slowed his mind as well. The fox's chakra is very dangerous, so Naruto must have some kind of natural defense against the Kyuubi's effects if he can handle it. Jiraiya and Tsunade turned thoughtful as Kakashi spoke. The nurse was the first to say what she thought. Chakra traits are passed down through families. Kushina was always strangely resistant to the Kyuubi, which is why she was chosen to be the fox's container. It makes sense that Naruto would have some of that resistance, especially since he's been in contact with the Kyuubi in some way his whole life. Jiraiya said, you want him to have some way to protect himself from the fox. Kakashi nodded. He's always been powerless about his situation. I think being able to do something will help. Jiraiya hummed to himself, nodding as he thought with one hand going to his chin. There's not much. Naruto's too young and untrained to be able to do something really effective. What point was he at in his schooling? Just molding chakra, Kakashi said. He didn't know where Naruto stood in the class, but he guessed he was near the bottom. The class itself was still about molding chakra, though. At Naruto's level, I don't expect much, but if his chakra is naturally resistant to the Kyuubi's effects, he might be able to protect himself by shaping as much chakra as he can. Jiraiya shrugged and said, there's no harm in trying. Tsunade laughed. TCH, we still don't fully understand the balance and relationship between Naruto, his chakra, and the Kyuubi. If he regularly recycles some of the Kyuubi's chakra into his own, he could end up attracting more of the Kyuubi's latent chakra and increase the risk of being overwhelmed. But if we can catch the incoming chakra quick enough, then that will only help us, Jiraiya argued. There's just no way to know unless we try. Tsunade looked angry and crossed her arms under her big chest. You could make things worse, or we could fix them almost entirely, Jiraiya countered. We have to do something, no matter what. Why don't we let Naruto decide? Kakashi looked down to the blonde shifting in his sleep. They all glanced down at the 8-year-old. His mouth hung open, pouring out soft snores with each breath. When he turned, his clothes fell out of place and moved to the side. We still need to prepare the sealing mechanism for the Kyuubi's chakra, Jiraiya said, a flash of sentiment in his eye as he watched the boy sleep. There's no need to wake him up until then, and he'll need all the rest he can get before we try this. Do you have any ideas for how we can catch and hold this chakra? A normal device won't work on it, Tsunade asked her old teammate as she started to work on the problem herself in silence. I was thinking we could modify your chakra retaining crystals, Jiraiya said, fingering a spent one still hanging from his bed. If we can put it together with the right seals, it could at least be used to store things temporarily. The rest would be up to the other Konoha to figure out. The doctor gave a nod and a sigh. I'll pull out my research notes from when I first created the things. In the meantime, you two try to get some rest as well. We're all going to need it. Then, muttered under her breath as she left the room, heaven help us if Minato finds out. When Naruto woke up, the room was dark and he was sleeping on a cot between two beds. The only source of light in the room was a lamp next to Kakashi's bed. The white-haired man was hunched over a book, and he was so interested in what he was reading that he didn't move when Naruto got on the bed next to him. Naruto had to squint to see the book's spine. Gross porn. He looked over at the bedside table and saw a stack of books that were all part of the same series. He had a vague idea that the other Kakashi might like smut as much as this one did. Naruto leaned over to look at the book and wondered what was so interesting about it that Kakashi was paying so much attention to it. Kakashi finally noticed the movement. He closed the book quickly so Naruto couldn't see any of the words. Oh, Naruto, you're awake. Kakashi opened the drawer of the end table and dumped the book inside, quickly sweeping the rest of the collection and behind it. As Naruto nodded, his eyes lingered on the now closed drawer, and his interest grew a little. Most of the time, the things that adults didn't want kids to see were more interesting. Well, sometimes. Things that adults kept secret were sometimes just boring. Are you hungry? I could ask the nurse or guard to bring you some ramen if you are, Kakashi said. This immediately brought Naruto's attention back to the white-haired man and away from the drawer. Ramen? Naruto asked, his eyes shining. Yes, that's my favorite. Kakashi laughed and said, I know. He got out of bed slowly, one leg at a time, and walked to the door like an old man. He whispered to one of the guards in the hall as he opened the door. After a few nods, the door was closed, and Kakashi slowly made his way back to his bed. Naruto frowned at how slowly things were going and wrinkled his forehead in worry and confusion. Should you really be out walking? You don't look better yet. Actually, I'm doing pretty well considering. Usually, I wouldn't even be able to move this soon after chakra exhaustion. It's only because of Tsunade that I can get out of bed. Despite the reassurance, Kakashi let out a relieved gasp as he partially collapsed back on the bed and dragged his feet back under the covers. Doesn't seem like it, Naruto muttered. He didn't want Kakashi to hear what he said, but the way the man ruffled his hair a second later showed that he was wrong. Hey, he said, how did you know that ramen was my favorite? Kakashi moved and then shrugged. He crossed his arms over his chest and put them back in his lap. One of my jobs before the invasion was to keep an eye on you. You eat too much of that stuff, and you should be eating more vegetables, but we've both been through a lot, so we both deserve a treat. Naruto looked at the other Kakashi and said, I don't get it. Well, he thought this Kakashi was really his Kakashi since they were both from the same world, but he met the Kakashi from the new world first, so that Kakashi felt more like his than this one. Naruto gave a head shake. Having to deal with two different worlds was hard enough without having to deal with duplicates of people. It just kept getting harder and harder. The two Kakashis were easy to tell apart. The one sitting in front of him looked so much older and more worn than the one from this world. He even had white hair, which made him look like he was from that world. The hard part about talking about them was trying to tell them apart. Naruto went back to his first question and asked, why didn't you talk to me before? Kakashi sighed and looked down at his hands for a moment. As Kakashi tried to talk a few times and failed, the silence got longer. He took a deep breath and tried to get the words out. Your father meant a lot to me. He was my sensei and the only thing I had left besides the village. When he died, Kakashi stopped, his brow furrowed. Naruto almost regretted asking. He thought about telling the man that they didn't need to talk about it anymore, but a part of Naruto did need to know. If he had just one other person in the village to talk to and be his friend, he would have been a lot less lonely. The man with silver hair drew himself up around the words. It was very hard. You've always looked a lot like him, and it hurt to be reminded of that. Even though the explanation didn't make Naruto feel better about being alone for so long, it did make it easier for him to deal with Kakashi. Kakashi said, I'm sorry, Naruto. If I could change how things are, I would, but as it is, it's okay, Naruto said, putting on a fake smile. I mean, things will be better now. And you won't have to miss your dad anymore because he's here. Kakashi frowned and looked away from Naruto with his eyes. The silence grew longer and thinner, and Naruto felt like he was missing something important again. He didn't ask because Jiraiya came through the door with one arm around the shoulders of a very angry Tsunade. This may have saved him. This would have been a lot easier if you'd just used the wheelchair, you jerk, the doctor snarled. Jiraiya, who was panting as they moved across the room, said, I can't be seen being pushed around in a wheelchair like some old and sick guy. Tsunade's eyes rolled. Everyone knows you're old. You should worry more about getting healthy. Jiraiya laughed as he sat down on the bed. Like you're one to talk, he said. Would you like to say that again? Tsunade's eyes got very small. No, why are you being so loud? I'm trying to sleep. Jiraiya rolled over or tried to, but stopped when he twisted his body too much. He settled for putting one arm over his eyes instead. TCH, Tsunade said as she rolled her eyes and turned away. Kakashi and Naruto were both sitting on Kakashi's bed. Are you awake? Have you told Naruto what we're going to do? She asked Kakashi. Naruto kept turning his head back and forth between the two, his curiosity getting stronger and stronger. What? Naruto asked, eager for something other than sitting in that room with nothing but the four walls and Kakashi's porn to entertain himself. What's going on? No, Kakashi said over Naruto's head in question. I just hadn't done it yet. Tsunade threw her hair over her shoulder. Putting it off won't make it easier in the long run. Kakashi gave a nod and then looked at Naruto. Naruto asked again, what is it? He got on his knees and seemed to be bouncing with excitement. What? Calm down, said Kakashi, putting his hand on Naruto's blonde head and rolling his eyes. Naruto stopped jumping and sat back on his heels, waiting. We have a plan that will keep the Kyuubi from stopping you from going outside. Naruto jumped back up to his knees and asked, really? Jiraiya groaned and pulled a pillow over his head as Naruto's voice rose to a high pitch. How? When can we do it? When can I go outside again? Can we go to Ikaraku's for ramen? Kakashi put his hands up and quickly looked toward the door. Don't talk so loud. We need to keep this between the four of us. As Naruto bit down on his lip, his smile grew even wider and more mischievous. He was so bored that he was ready to die, and this was even better than a joke to cheer him up. So it's like a mission, a secret plan. Yes, Kakashi nodded. We're going to catch the extra Kyuubi chakra floating around so it won't hurt you anymore. How are we going to do that? Naruto asked, tilting his head. They couldn't even see the chakra, so how are they going to catch it? Kakashi opened his mouth to answer, but Rin walked through the door with several bowls of ramen on a tray. This made Kakashi shut his mouth. The guards told me you wanted ramen for dinner, she said, stopping when she saw that everyone was looking at her and the tension was rising. Am I talking over you? You might as well stay, Tsunade told the guard as she crossed to the door and shut it. She told the guard not to bother her again. I'll feel better about it all if there's another doctor around anyway. Another doctor on hand for what? Rin asked as she set the tray down on the nightstand and looked around the room with a frown. We're going to catch the Kyuubi, Naruto said, almost shouting the secret because he was so excited to tell it. Don't say anything, Tsunade told Naruto as she hit him on the head. This is still a secret. Rin's eyes were wide as she looked around the room. Are you serious? Have you told Minato? The silence was enough to answer the question. All of you want to die. The Kyuubi's chakra floating around outside is too much of a risk, Jiraiya said with a stifled groan as he forced himself to sit down. Before he leaned back again, Tsunade put another pillow behind him. You saw what happened before, and we can't let that happen again, especially in front of a big crowd. Rin's eyes went down to Naruto for a second, but as soon as she did, they shot away as she nodded her head. Naruto hunched himself up because he didn't want to think about the people who had died because of the Kyuubi's anger. He asked again, how are we going to do it? To try to change the subject. See these chakra crystals? Kakashi asked, pointing to the crystals that were strung around his bed and just barely lit. Naruto nodded. They are made to hold chakra, and we will make similar crystals that can hold the Kyuubi's chakra. Naruto nodded and looked serious, as if Kakashi was asking him what to do instead of telling him what they were going to do. And you're going to catch it. Then I'll be able to go outside. He was thrilled by the idea. They would figure out a way to fix everything, of course. There's no way they could fail with Kakashi, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and now Rin. Minato joining their team would be the only thing that could make it better. He looked at the windows with a creased brow. How will you get it all in one place so you can catch it? Kakashi smiled briefly, and Naruto saw a flash of it through the mask. Then the smile went away, and seriousness took its place. Naruto, that's where you come in. Naruto turned his head sideways. He didn't know how he could help, but he still wanted to help in any way he could. What should I do? Kakashi put an arm around Naruto and squeezed him for a moment in a half hug. Kakashi didn't hesitate much before saying, the Kyuubi chakra is drawn to you. If you went outside and stood still for a long time, the chakra would gather around you and we could take it. Naruto pulled away from Kakashi as a cold hand wrapped around his heart. He turned his head back and forth to look at the other people in the room. Rin was the only one who looked half as scared as he did. Rin said with clenched teeth, you can't be serious. Think of the risk to the village and Naruto. How could you even think of using him as bait? Kakashi said in a soft, sharp voice, we won't do it unless Naruto agrees. His eyes were on Naruto. But in the time we have, there's no other way. But Rin started, but Tsunade cut her off. We've figured out what the risk is, and if Naruto agrees, it's the best we can do. There was silence as everyone looked at Naruto. Well, kid, what are you going to do? Naruto had lost all of his voice. He wanted to say no, but the word got stuck in his throat. The thought of going outside and seeing that red haze waiting for him made him want to curse and yell. What if, like last time, he lost control? What if he hurt someone like he hurt those enemy shinobi? But this time it was Kakashi, Rin, Tsunade, or Jiraiya, his friends or friends of his dad. If he hurt them, Minato would hate him. Naruto finally managed to choke out, what if I hurt you like I hurt those other guys? He couldn't look at any of them, so he kept his face scrunched up and his eyes fixed on the bed. This was his first mission, and he didn't want to cry at the start. Kakashi put his hand on Naruto's head again and said, you won't hurt us, kid. Kakashi pushed Naruto's head up, and Naruto partially ducked to meet Kakashi's eyes. That won't hurt any of us. We'll have guards and chakra seals to keep us safe, and you're stronger than the fox, so you won't let him hurt us. Naruto thought about what Minato had said with wide eyes. Minato had told Naruto and the Kyuubi, I think you're stronger, and now Kakashi was saying the same thing. It couldn't happen by chance. Kakashi and Minato were two of the strongest and smartest ninjas Naruto had ever met. They wouldn't be wrong, not with the whole village at stake. Naruto looked back at the window and thought about the red mist he'd seen in his dreams and how tightly it had held him the first time he'd seen the Kyuubi. In the back of his mind, he felt the same itch, the feeling that he should be somewhere else doing something. This might have been what he was supposed to do. Naruto nodded and said, okay, I'll do it. He felt more like a real ninja than he ever had before. Konan was tied down and couldn't move. She was gasping for air and panting. She had stopped trying to lift her head a long time ago, and now her only goal was to stay awake. Her questioners had stopped for a moment and were talking quietly about the next step somewhere else in the room. The first round of questions was short. They asked Conan a few questions, but he didn't say anything in response. Then they moved on to more rigorous questions. Conan flicked her eyes up to the soft murmuring on the other side of the room and took some of her attention off of breathing to focus on the papers she'd put her chakra into. She could tell they were in the room because she could feel them nearby, but she couldn't concentrate enough to figure out where they were. As she fought against the chakra bonds, the pain in her wrists got worse. She didn't need to make any more chakra to spy through the paper she'd already infused, so it should still be possible even when she's in the restraints. It was just very painful because her body tried to make the chakra out of habit, but the restraints kept the power from getting to her. She tried to listen to the conversation through the papers like a radio, but her eyes were getting blurry from trying so hard. Not working. We can't go back to the Hokage without answers. Forget Hokage-sama. I don't want to go to Ibiki and tell him we didn't get anything. He might decide we need to learn the basics of interrogation all over again. Does anyone know when Inoichi will be well enough to come in and try his jutsu? The last I heard, it was probably tomorrow or the next day. This is our last chance to talk to her before we lose her. Perhaps if we, as Conan's attention wavered, the conversation went away. She didn't think she could handle a direct attack on her mind, which was what Inoichi was best at. She'd have enough resources to keep some of her information safe, but they were likely to get something from her in the end. Whether she let them or not, it would depend on exactly what they did to get her to remember them. It came down to two options. Either Conan had to get away before then, or she had to make herself unable to betray Nagato. She wouldn't break the trust of the only friend and family she had left. Conan racked her brain, trying to think of any way she could make things better for herself. The main problem was that she couldn't use jutsu because she didn't have enough chakra. That was the first thing she had to fix. Daydreaming. Her interrogator's voice pulled Conan out of her thoughts. If you don't tell us the truth when we ask you questions, you won't get out of here, do you understand? Conan put up her guard by clenching her jaw. Minato shook his head as he looked up from the report that had just been given to him and said, "This isn't good enough. I want the medical facilities to be double-stocked with as many supplies as possible in a short amount of time. I also want the civilians and people who were hurt during the attack to be moved to the facilities that are the farthest from the Hokage Tower." The CH-nin said, "Hi, Hokage-sama," and then put one more folder on the desk. "What we know most recently from the autopsy division." Minato waved his hand and said, "Thank you." He then sent the CH-nin away. With a bow, the young shinobi left. When the door to Minato's office closed and they were left alone, Shikaku stepped forward to fill the empty space in front of Minato's desk. His eyes moved slowly over the seal diagrams that were all over the surface. He didn't seem to notice or care about any of them. "So this is what you're going to do?" "Yes," Minato said without looking up from the diagrams after he dropped the medical status report on the floor and set the autopsy report to the side on the desk. "It's the best way for us to move forward." Shikaku shrugged and said, "Well, we could just break the mirror. If they did figure out how to rebuild it, it could take years, and we would be ready for them. You can keep your son, and the village won't have to worry about an attack." Minato moved and looked up from the seal he was making. "There are other things that come into play. Could you tell me what they are?" Minato put his brush down on the table. He had been using it to draw designs for seals and formulas. He just looked at Shikaku for a moment and thought about how open he should be. Minato would bet his life on the man being loyal and honest, but the situation was dangerous. When Minato didn't say anything, Shikaku said, "The boy is a Jinchuriki, isn't he? That's why you're worried that the other Konoha will come looking for him. The burns on your arms and the injuries on the enemy soldiers who tried to take him show that Naruto is the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. I should know better by now than to underestimate your ability to think things through," Minato said with a laugh, as the stress of the situation grew. "Yes, he is the Kyuubi's container. That's why he was chosen," Minato said after he thought for a moment. "The Kakashi from the other Konoha also came through the mirror during the attack. I can't cut him off from his village without his permission. And knowing Kakashi, I don't think he would give up on his village easily." Shikaku agreed. "No, he wouldn't," and pursed his lips. "How do you plan to defend the village during the counterattack? If you open that portal, we'll be just as vulnerable to attack as they will be." Minato's mouth twitched into a smile, but then it went back to being flat. Shikaku was always there for him. Minato shuffled the scrolls and papers on his desk until he found a map of the city. "I want you to set up barriers that move out from the Hokage Tower. Have reaction forces ready in case the barriers are broken. We'll want to contain any fallout in the smallest part of the village as possible. I'll be going through the mirror after dark when everything is shut down for the night, so that should get rid of most of the civilians in the area. Keep others from wandering into the area as well." Shikaku nodded and looked at the defense plan that Minato had drawn on the map. We should make the side of the wall that separates the civilian and residential areas stronger. Minato gave the map to the ANBU leader and went back to his seal diagrams. He could feel that he was getting close to the right answer. Hi, Hokage-sama, Shikaku bowed, recognizing the dismissal. After I brief the best ANBU agents I have for your invasion force, I'll send them over, he said, pausing at the desk before turning to leave. When he turned around to look over his shoulder, he broke the rules, which made them both think of when they were both jounin. Be careful, Minato. I know what it's like to be a father and want to do everything to protect your child, but you're also the Hokage, and your first duty is to the village. Minato stopped writing and squeezed his eyes shut before looking up to face Shikaku. Thank you, but I know my duty to the village, and that includes the future generations who will take care of it. My son is part of that future. What kind of village would we be? And what would we teach him if we sacrificed him and the Kakashi from his own world just because it was easier and safer? This is the right thing to do. Shikaku's mouth twitched in the direction of a smile before going back to its usual bored look. He nodded, turned around, and went out the door, leaving Minato alone with his seals. Naruto said, "You'll like it here." He was trying, even if he didn't realize it, to get Kakashi's attention away from the scroll we were studying. It's just like the old village, but better, and we'll be able to spend time together. You can teach me jutsu and learn from Dad again, and you can be twins with the other Kakashi. It's going to be great. Kakashi told the boy, Naruto, you should be shaping chakra to get ready to fight the Kyuubi. He looked up at the door and hoped that Tsunade would soon come back. They had a test chakra crystal that they thought could hold the Kyuubi's power, but they couldn't really test it until they got out and had a real Kyuubi concentration to hold. Naruto said a few choice words under his breath, then closed his eyes and went quiet. The silence helped Kakashi focus on the readings they got from the new crystal, but more importantly, it helped him forget the one thing they hadn't told Naruto yet, which was that Kakashi wouldn't be staying in this world if everything went well. It was both tempting and painful to think about staying, and Kakashi was sick of hearing Naruto talk about it. Tsunade came in through the door, a whirl of blonde ponytails and a green jacket, after a few minutes of silence. Rin was right behind him and was carrying a bundle of cloth. Kakashi looked at Tsunade and tried as hard as he could to accept the ghost from his past. We got it, Tsunade said, pointing to Rin and telling him to put the package on the bed. Shaking Jiraiya awake, Tsunade continued. It's not perfect, but it will work as long as we have enough of them and are careful to keep the chakra flow steady. Rin pulled back the cloth and saw a few heavy, pale yellow crystals. Kakashi picked up one to see how heavy it was. He could hear Jiraiya muttering about being woken up from real sleep from the other bed, but he didn't care about the fight between the two Sannin. If Tsunade and Rin were right, these crystals could save both Naruto and his village, Konoha. He couldn't stop himself, so he scraped together some of the little chakra he'd been able to gather with Tsunade's help and gave the crystal in his hand a gentle push. The crystal immediately grabbed hold of the chakra and sucked it in like a rock to the bottom of a pool. The small effort made him feel sick and dizzy. Rin yelled, "What are you doing?" and grabbed the crystal back. These are made to absorb a very large amount of high-density chakra. If you let it, it could drain you dry if you let it. Being in a war zone has made you careless, Tsunade told Kakashi's bed as she left her argument with Jiraiya. I understand that you want to try them out for yourself, but try to be a good example for Naruto and Jiraiya. There's no need to give them bad ideas. When Naruto's name was said, he didn't seem to notice. Instead, he reached out to touch one of the crystals himself, but Rin pulled it away from him. So, those things will catch the Kyuubi. Tsunade said, they're going to catch the Kyuubi's chakra. The outside chakra is drawn to you because it's not quite fully conscious yet. Naruto asked as he sat down on the edge of the bed, then what do we do with it? Tsunade just shrugged and held one of the crystals up to the light to see how perfect the inside was. Then Kakashi will take it home with him when he goes back to his own world. Kakashi flinched. He hadn't planned to tell Naruto that until he had to. When he looked over, he saw that Naruto was staring at him with wide eyes. He said, it's the only way to try to stop any arguments. The village will need as many shinobi as they can get to win the war and then to keep invaders away afterward. I can't just leave them. Naruto shook his head very hard to say no. Why can't Kakashi Jiji stay here, too? Naruto asked Jiraiya while ignoring Kakashi and looking at Jiraiya. Kakashi said, with his nose scrunched up under his mask, I'm not old. I'm the same age as the Kakashi in this world, so there's no reason to call me Jiji. And not old at all. Jiraiya looked at Kakashi's face and hair and said, hey, you do have gray hair like an old man. When I was 8, my hair was the same color as it is now. Kakashi's one eye couldn't decide if it was confused, frustrated, or annoyed. Yes, but now you have the wrinkles to prove it. Old man, Jiraiya said with a touch of joy in his voice. You're even older than me. You do look tired, Rin said quietly as she stood off to the side. It didn't help that you used up some of your chakra testing the crystal. Kakashi shook his head. This made him feel dizzy again, but it went away after he stopped. He pulled the blonde down in front of him and said, "Listen, Naruto." He looked around for a while, trying to think of a way to explain it to an 8-year-old. It had been so long since he'd talked to someone Naruto's age that he wasn't sure if he could still, or if he'd ever been able to, even when he was Naruto's age. He went to the ANBU to avoid taking students on purpose, but now he was in trouble. He promised himself that when he got back to his own world and the war was over, he'd cut back on the ANBU mission, take some students, and try to join the world. We all have to give up something, Kakashi said, more out of a need to say something than anything else, as he looked up into that blue eye. For me, that will be a chance to be here with you, Rin, and Minato. For you, that will be a chance to see the Sandaime again. But we're ninja. We never give up and do what we have to do to make sure everyone we care about is safe. Do you understand? Kakashi thought for a moment that his words had made no difference. Naruto's eyes fell down and away, and for a long, quiet moment, his brow furrowed. Then he gave a nod. Yeah, I understand. Good, Tsunade said. Then go back to shaping chakra. Someone will be here soon to replace your chakra crystals. Minato will finish his preparations in a day or two. We'll need more than this if we want to try this when he launches his attack through the mirror. Rin and I have to go back to making a lot more of these if we want to even have a chance of succeeding. Minato looked over at the two people on his left and right. Itachi and Kakashi stood facing the mirror with their generic ANBU masks already on. They were waiting for Minato to open the portal. Then he turned his head and looked at the 4 ANBU who were standing behind them. When their Hokage looked at them, they all nodded to show that they were ready. Minato looked back at the mirror and put his own mask back on. After everything it had been through, the mirror looked worse for wear. The cracks had broken into small pieces, which made the once smooth surface look wavy and broke up the reflections of the room around it. When Minato did his own tests after he found the foreign chakra in the object, some of the cracks got bigger, but some of the smaller cracks almost went away because of the slow and steady flow of chakra into the crystal. Minato had also put seals around the edges of the crystal to help keep it together when he reopened the doorway, and the battle that was sure to follow. Behind the invasion force were 2 ANBU who knew how to use seals and control chakra. During the battle, I hoped that the two of them would be able to keep the mirror in good shape. In Minato's calculations, the idea that something could happen to their only link to their own world in the upcoming battle was a big deal. When added to every other logical argument, the risk almost made Mintao destroy the mirror, which was something he had been tempted to do from the start. But it was worth the risk to make sure Naruto wouldn't have to worry about a crazy person getting into their world, to help that other Konoha, and to give Kakashi the chance to go home if he wanted to. Minato couldn't help but put himself in the place of the Sandaime, who was fighting for the village in a battle that might not end and had no help in sight. If Minato were in the same situation, he would hope that the Sandaime would at least try to help in some way. If everything went as planned, Kakashi and Itachi would keep Nagato busy while Minato and 2 of the ANBU destroyed any information about the mirror. The last 2 ANBU would guard the way they could get away. Depending on how the tower in the other world is set up, it might be easier to just destroy the whole thing and bury the mirror, and any AIM forces that are there. Minato will decide what to do when he sees the place. No one in their group thought that all the information about the mirror would be in one place that was easy to destroy. Even if they found everything, they would still have to worry about anyone who had seen it and remembered it. Still, one of the easiest ways to make the mirror less dangerous was to limit the number of people who knew about it and could use it. Damage control for the mirror and keeping Nagato from ever coming back or sending anyone else to their world was their main goal, and they would do whatever it took to reach those goals. Minato looked at the mirror and said one last thing to the shinobi who were going with him. Remember, from what we've learned, each version of Pain has a different ability. We don't know how many there are, but they probably have red hair and piercings. At least one of the ones on the other side has the ability to push and pull objects toward or away from himself with very little time between attacks. A round of high, Hokage-sama told him that they understood. Minato took one last steady breath and sped through the signs. The mirror sputtered and blinked a bright, powerful flash before the light rushed across its surface and a reluctant image of a different world appeared. Nagato was kneeling on the other side of the mirror when Minato pushed his arm through the glass, making cracks appear, and threw a few of his special kunai into the room, which surprised Nagato. Konan let out a gasp when the things that were holding her to the wall let go. She didn't know how long they kept asking her questions about the conversation she had overheard. It seemed like days, but it probably wasn't that long. Maybe 10 or 12 more hours. For a moment, she could feel the small amount of chakra she had flowing through her veins. It didn't last long, though, because another set of manacles quickly clamped around her wrists and stopped the feeling. Her reactions were slowed down because she was tired and hurting from the more and more aggressive questions. She also didn't have time to infuse any more papers with her chakra. She would have to make do with the 5 papers she had in her possession from before. Conan went out desperately looking for them. If they weren't close, they wouldn't help her, but she could feel the faint echo of her own chakra in the corner, even though the restraints made her feel numb. With her head down and her arms held by guards on both sides, Conan knew that her options and chances of getting away were quickly running out. The next time they took her out on a quest, they would attack her memories and try to get into her mind. After that, she would have less chance of fighting back or running away. She had to do something now, or she wouldn't be ready to take advantage of the chance when it came, even if it did come. The small group went around another bend. They would be at her cell in a few minutes. Isolating her probably started out as a way to keep her locked up and hide the fact that she was there, but now Conan could use it to her advantage. There were 2 guards on either side of her, and one of the interrogators led them to the cell doors. They thought she was too weak to cause any trouble, so they cut down on the number of guards who followed her. But Conan had been through this kind of interrogation and worse before. After Yahiko died, Nagato was able to easily start a civil war for a reason. By the end of his rule, Hanzo had turned into a mean and cruel dictator, and his minions did horrible things to their enemies, including women and children. She could handle the pain and tiredness, and she could keep going. She closed her eyes and slumped into the arms of the guards as she looked around for her papers. The interrogator had 3 papers with her chakra energy on them. There are 3 papers, 3 watchmen. If she folded paper tight enough and added the power of her chakra, it could pierce skin. She was usually very picky about the paper she used to make sure it was strong and would last. But for now, this would have to do. The 2 people who were holding her arms were thrown off by her sudden weight, and they had to change their grip on her to keep dragging Conan down the hall. One of them muttered a few curses as they waited for the interrogator to open the door to her cell. The guard who had cursed said to the interrogator, "I think she's passed out on us. Hurry up with that door, she's heavier than she looks." The interrogator mumbled a reply as he fumbled with both hands to find the key, and dropped his papers all over the floor. He looked down for a moment because all the papers and forms around him were distracting him, and Conan took her chance. She jerked to the side, which threw the guards off. Then, she brought her fist up and smashed it into one guard's face. She quickly changed directions and hit the other guard in the stomach with the same fist. "What?" yelled the interrogator, dropping his keys as he rushed to hold her down. Conan moved back and the 2 guards pushed him away, but then he ran into the wall. She lost her balance and rolled to the other side of the hallway before she dove for the keys. Since she was also paying attention to her paper, she wouldn't be able to keep avoiding him for long. Before she could take off one of the handcuffs, the interrogator lunged at her again, his hands making a seal as he took a deep breath. The other 2 guards got up and moved to stop anyone from going back down the hall. As Conan picked up the sheets from where they were scattered and made them into tight spirals, the chakra restraint on her other wrist burned. She threw the paper spikes at the guards as a fireball exploded from the mouth of the interrogator. As the spike went through the man's throat, he choked and coughed, and his hands scratched at the wound. The fireball shrank and died, but not before it grew big enough to fill the dead end of the hall where Conan was. She fell over to the side and lay flat on the floor. It was all she could do without more shaped chakra to help her protect herself or move around. Before it went out, the fire rolled over her head, burned and singed her clothes, skin, and hair. When Conan looked up, he saw that the 3 guards were on the ground. He was out of breath from all the work and pain. The interrogator was dead, and the wound through his neck was still leaking blood. She had tried harder to be right for him, partly because he was a direct threat and partly because he had put her through a tough interrogation. Both guards were still alive, but one was losing consciousness quickly, and the other was struggling to get back on his feet with anger and pain written all over his face. He tried to call for help, but all that came out was a gargle as blood poured out of his neck and soaked the paper. Conan took off the last cuff and put it on the ground. She had a harder time getting up than she thought she would. She didn't have much chakra, and those 3 darts hurt, but she was still better off than the guard, even though she had aches, pains, burns, and less chakra. His blood was running down his chest and all over the floor. She hadn't cut the artery as she had hoped, but she had at least cut it. Conan walked slowly and dragged herself toward the last man. He fought to get up and fumbled with a kunai to hit her back. Conan just moved out of the way and twitched her fingers to get rid of the paper dart. The steady flow of blood turned into a river, and the guard was gasping for air in an instant. After another second, the guard stopped moving and lay still. Conan didn't care if the man was dead or unconscious as long as he was no longer a threat and couldn't raise the alarm. She stopped and leaned against the wall, letting her breath even out after the fight and however long she had been questioned this time. The adrenaline was leaving her body, leaving her exhausted and in a lot of pain. But she had to move soon. Getting past the 3 people who were with her wasn't the end of her escape plan. Now, she had to get out of the building, into the Hokage Tower, and back into her own world. When she looked at the task as a whole, it seemed impossible, but her 2 friends had done more impossible things in their lives. It was a matter of taking one step at a time to stay alive. The 3 guards were still on the ground, so Conan knelt down next to the one closest to her. It was a slow, painful motion that made her wonder if she would ever be able to get back up. The interrogator didn't have much except a small kunai and a few pieces of paper, but she could use any kind of paper. The other guards had a variety of kunai and explosive tags, as well as a blank scroll with ink from one that was used for sealing. She took the stolen items and put them in a hip pack. Then, she dragged the guards to the cell and locked them in. After she was done and had double-checked the hallway again, Conan took a moment longer to bandage the worst of her wounds. She didn't know when the guards would be back, so she had to move and get out of the building as soon as she could. The next corridor over was also empty, and there were not many guards in the ones after that. Even though the urge to run was strong, Conan fought it. Because of her injuries and the situation she was in, she had to be careful, patient, and sneaky, but she had spent most of her life getting better at these things. During Hanzo's rule, you couldn't have made it as a rebel group without them. She had no doubt that she would get out of the building. When she did get away, it would be a little harder to figure out what to do. Kakashi thought to himself, it's a good thing it's so dark out. It explained how they got to the high-level training grounds. The defenses set up for Minato's attack were also focused on the Hokage Tower, which helped. Shikaku's seals and troops were meant to stop violent attacks and enemy infiltration caused by Minato's counteroffensive. They were not meant to find their own people slowly moving around the city. Kakashi saw Jiraiya moving in his own chair with the help of Tsunade when he looked over his shoulder as Rin pushed him along in his wheelchair. Jiraiya didn't want to use the 2 wheelchairs at first, but Tsunade and common sense won out in the end. The better would be if they could move quickly and not get too tired. Naruto stood in the middle and looked back and forth between the 2 groups. Seals that blocked chakra were almost everywhere on the boy. Every time he walked, he made a crinkling sound, and even in the dark, he seemed to reflect the tiniest bit of light off the white paper. The seals were just a stopgap until they could get to the training grounds and set the trap. After some discussion, they decided that the best place to lure the Kyuubi would be the high-level training grounds. The area was big and alone, but it was still inside the village walls and defenses. There were permanent seals put in place to stop chakra from leaking into the village, and high-level jutsu was being used all the time to chew up and turn over the ground. If they were very lucky, they might be able to catch the Kyuubi without anyone knowing. Any noises would just be put down to late-night training. Kakashi thought they had 10 to 15 more minutes until the Hokage opened the mirror and attacked Pain. Then it took another 20 or 30 minutes before anyone noticed they weren't at the hospital. That was the next time the nurse was supposed to make her rounds. Before that, Tsunade had told the guards to be afraid of God and not wake up the patients who were sleeping. They would hopefully already be set up and drawing the Kyuubi's chakra by that time. There was some disagreement about how much Kakashi and Jiraiya could help, but neither of them wanted to be left behind. Kakashi stretched out one hand to see how strong he was. Even though the chakra crystals helped a lot, he was still not well enough to be of much help. He could, however, do small things like break the seals, watch the chakra, or put suppressors on Naruto if things got out of hand. At least Jiraiya was better at shaping and controlling chakra. If any of this worked, the old Sannin might be able to control some of the chakra flow into the crystals. Their progress was slower than Kakashi would have liked, and he knew that Tsunade was also frustrated because she was softly cursing behind him. But if they wanted to do this as safely as possible, they needed the distance from the main village to act as a buffer for the Kyuubi's chakra. One good thing about how slowly they moved was that by the time they got to the training grounds, it was too late for anyone else to be there. It wasn't much of a good thing, but Kakashi had learned to be happy with whatever he could get. In contrast, setting up the crystals was much faster, even though the work itself was more delicate. Jiraiya and Tsunade told Kakashi and Rin what to do while they set up the trap for the Kyuubi. Jiraiya drew out the seal they need with a thick paintbrush and large can of chakra-infused ink. He moved as slowly as they did to get to the field, and every time he had to move or shift, he winced and let out tight groans that he quickly stifled. Tsunade handed out the chakra crystals and with Kakashi and Rin planted them in the ground at regular, specific intervals around the seal. Naruto sat in the middle of everything, scratching at the edges of the chakra-suppressing seals and trying to get all of his questions out of his mouth while frowning. As they put the last crystal in place, Kakashi looked up at the stars, which were much brighter where they were. Minato-sensei and the others should have started the counterattack by now. If everything went according to plan, they should be in the other world. Tsunade nodded, moving around to the outer side of the seal. We should get started on this, since it will take some time to pull in all of the dormant chakra. Kakashi, start taking Naruto's suppressants off while we turn on the seal. Kakashi nodded and walked toward Naruto. He looked at Naruto's shaking hands and wide eyes and said, "Don't worry. There are 4 of us who can help if something goes wrong, and the crystals should absorb the chakra before it gets to you." Naruto just nodded, attempting his 1000-watt smile but only managing a nervous few hundred watts. "Oh," he said as Kakashi pulled a chakra suppressant from Naruto's head. "That hurt. Well, these are not meant to fall off easy." Kakashi grinned at the glaring 8-year-old in front of him. He patted Naruto on the head, eyes giving away the smile beneath his mask. It could be worse. Outside of the seal, Tsunade, Rin, and Jiraiya had positioned themselves around the seal, and as one ran through the signs to activate the crystals, Kakashi pulled off the last sticker just before they finished and turned to watch. Looking through his normal eye, everything seemed normal. The night was dark and cool with just a touch of breeze ruffling the grass. Kakashi hesitated, knowing Tsunade and Rin would disapprove. He wasn't even sure if he could handle it, considering his condition, but he was much more recovered than he'd ever hoped to be so soon after his injuries. He could take one quick look to check if it was working. Stepping around to Naruto's side, as much to be ready with chakra suppressors as to hide the movement of his hand, Kakashi reached up and pushed his headband out of the way, exposing his Sharingan. With a deep breath, he directed his gaze to the area around them, looking for any sign that their plan was working. He forced down the gasp that tried to escape. Even though the chakra suppressors hadn't been off for more than a minute or two, the red Kyuubi chakra was already building up in the field. Kakashi didn't say anything, not wanting to further worry Naruto, who was already clutching onto Kakashi's pant leg. But for the first time since discussing this plan, Kakashi wondered if they hadn't bitten off more than they could chew. The kunai never made it far. Pain deflected them almost immediately and they clattered against the walls. Minato could feel the pressure of Pain's push, trying to force him back through the mirror, but he flashed to one of his kunai already in the room, throwing another 2 kunai before he fully materialized. The second attack came too quickly after the first, and Pain was forced to dodge away, allowing Kakashi to slip through the mirror. Pain altered his tactics, pulling Kakashi forward, preparing to run him through with a long metal rod. Minato shot forward, colliding with Kakashi and moving them both to another kunai somewhere else in the room. Landing, both of them sent a series of kunai toward Pain. The timing was off for most of them though, and Pain managed to send the kunai shooting back toward Kakashi and Minato. Itachi reached through the mirror, but ran into the latest push from Pain, which stalled his momentum. Minato flashed to the mirror, grabbed Itachi's arm, and took them both to a kunai located deeper in the room. His kunai were scattered around the edges on the room now, growing in number with each attack. "We need to get a Burame through next," Minato murmured before flashing both of them behind some rubble as Pain pulled them toward him. Across the room, Kakashi threw a chain around one large piece of wall to keep him from being pulled toward Pain. He used the pulling force to send a kunai at Pain only to have it dodged. Having the mirror in the room and in such a fragile state was turning out to be an advantage. Pain couldn't use his technique too strongly because he was afraid of breaking the mirror completely. Even when Pain's attacks had less power, new cracks appeared along the edges of the black chakra glass. "Take care of the aim reinforcements coming up the corridor." Minato jerked his head toward the jagged remains of the door. Itachi nodded, waiting for Minato to send off another attack toward Pain before dodging around behind rubble and out the door. Beyond the mirror, Minato could see the next member in their invasion force coming through the glass. Pain's push forced them back. Minato kicked several pebbles out from his sheltered position behind the rubble. They moved back away from Pain as if swept up in a wave. The moment they slowed, Minato threw out a kunai, flashing to it in the instant between Pain's attacks. He appeared close to Pain and dodged the metal rod that was meant for his heart. He gasped. The strength of the chakra coming through the rod caught him by surprise, and his own Rasengan missed a direct hit. Instead, it clipped Pain in the shoulder but forced the man back a step. An explosion rocked the outer hall, causing dust to cascade down in the room. The ceiling had a big hole in it. It moved slowly, like slow-moving lightning, and for a moment, everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath as it spread. Before Minato made one last swipe with his kunai and pain pulled him toward a metal rod. The room was quiet but shaky for a moment. Minato saw where Kakashi and Aburame were hiding behind a broken piece of ceiling. The fight had been short, but it had been enough to get the next person in their group through. Minato looked up at the broken ceiling and thought, none of us can fight at full strength in this room. We can't if we don't want this place to fall on top of us. It only worked out well for them. Kakashi, Minato said, using the reflection of a kunai to watch Pain. Pain was still standing by the mirror, putting all of his chakra into keeping the object together. His head was turned toward where they were hiding, and his mouth was slightly twisted in annoyance. For now, the way between the two worlds was too important for both of them to risk losing. Pain wouldn't abandon his efforts at keeping the mirror together unless given no other choice. Keep him busy here while Aburame and I go search. The room and the mirror are both fragile. He won't risk using his full power, and destroying it so speed is your best weapon. Try and get the others through if you can. Hi, Kakashi nodded, then summoned Pakun, his tracker Ninken. Pakun helped them search, he told Pakun, but he told Minato to handle the details. Using his own hand mirror to check Pain's position, Kakashi sent out a clone while firing off a series of kunai in the same moment. Minato grabbed Aburame and the dog and flashed them both as close to the door as he could manage. Pain pulled, grabbing at them, and Minato just managed to embed a chain in the door, giving them something to hold on to. The pull wasn't as strong as Minato knew Pain could accomplish, but it was relentless, and the fight was reduced to tug-of-war as Pain attempted to draw them away from the door and Minato and Aburame held their ground. Minato looked back just in time to see Kakashi jump out of his anchor point and use the pull to attack Pain directly. The force stopped with the renewed clashing of metal on metal, and Minato used the opening to put a kunai outside of the room and flash himself, Aburame, and Pakun away. Shizune increased the magnification on the microscope, eyes squinting to make out the faintest change in muscle tissue that could have come from chakra manipulation. The lab was quiet and at half light. Many of the other medics had left to catch some well-deserved sleep. They had hurried to get through the bulk of the autopsy in time for the Hokage's planned offensive into the other world. But the minor nuances that usually came out in delicate examinations had to be set aside for after. They'd already delivered the information they had on the chakra receivers and their likely purpose. The results were extremely preliminary, but better than nothing and all they had time for before the counterattack. Glancing at the clock, Shizune took note of the time. If everything had gone according to plan, the Hokage and the strike force had already begun their attack. It would be difficult to get any new information to them in the midst of the battle, particularly against one as dangerous as Pain. Still, even with the Hokage currently occupied, the conclusion needed to be verified, and every piece of information was potentially useful. Shizune straightened up and her back cracked all the way down her spine as she arched it. She made a few notations on the paper next to her, describing her observations and possible causes. They had never studied the effect of using a dead body that had already been influenced by chakra used to perform ninjutsu. The result seemed to be a layering effect on the tissue, and was complicating her attempts to understand the chakra paths. If she could understand it better, then perhaps there could be a way to interfere with the secondary chakra paths created by the conductors implanted after death. Shizune paused, half bent to the microscope. There was a sound in the lab that sounded like fabric moving. If the others hadn't taken a much-needed break, and if she hadn't been alone for the last 30 minutes, she might not have heard it because it was so quiet. But she was sure she did. She stayed still and only moved her eyes across her lap as she tried to hear the noise again. There, near the exam table, there was movement. Even though there was no wind in the room, the sheet covering their specimen moved. Shizune had a thought because she had been thinking about how the Hokage's counterattack was already in progress. Her eyes darted to the pile of chakra receivers sitting on the exam table. They'd only removed the majority of chakra receptors from 2 of the bodies, and with the gateway open once again, Shizune grabbed a scalpel that was close to her on the desk and held it up to block an attack from one of the corpses that had been still before. One of Pain's bodies had clambering to its feet. One arm hung loose where Shizune and her team had removed the chakra receivers. Another body twitched on its own examination table. It was the one that could call creatures, but too many of its chakra transmitters had been taken out for it to be a threat. Shizune jumped away from the red-headed corpse and took a moment to be glad that the chakra receivers had been taken out of the last corpse. Now they only really had to handle one of Pain's bodies. She quickly looked over what had been said about this body as Pain tried to attack her again. The Hokage and other people who had fought this version said that its special ability was to absorb chakra attacks. Using her own poison darts she kept with her at all times would also be useless since the body itself was dead, merely manipulated by the chakra from the original pain. That left her taijutsu. Shizune shifted her stance, moving her front leg back to gain distance as well and prepare for any defense she might need. With one of the invaders reanimated, her priority had to be alerting the village and keeping the body here where it could be contained. Alone, she doubted she could defeat the body, but if she could sound the alarm then with the reinforcements, they could regain the situation. Taking her eyes off the intruder would be unwise, so Shizune thought back to what lay behind her in the lab. There were tables, chairs, and workstations, but she probably wouldn't have more than one chance to hide once the tension between them broke. The distance and the nature of the object she took for cover were vital. If she could buy herself just a few seconds she could set off the wards and alert reinforcements that something was amiss. A long moment stretched out before either one in the lab moved. It was one of those invisible signals that pushed both Shizune and Pain's body to react simultaneously. Shizune twisting and diving behind a thick lab station at the same moment Pain lunged forward. Shizune wove the signs and had just started to set off the alarm seals when Pain hit the side of the desk near her head, making it collapse. He used the proximity to absorb what chakra she had released for the alarm. Shizune reached out with her scalpel and cut down the side of a key chakra receptor deep into the arm of the body. Then, she used the cut to yank out the black rod, tearing flesh and tendon with it. Pain's arm jerked, moving to grab her, but it was slower, clumsier if only by a little. The black rod sent an unpleasant buzzing sensation up Shizune's arm. It was getting in the way of her chakra, so she dropped it and threw it so it skittered across the floor. There was no way to tell if the alarm had been noticed. Shizune didn't think she'd managed to fully activate it, but there was no time to reattempt because the body was lunging again. Though one of its arms were useless and the other less capable, its legs were just fine and it used those legs to keep after her. Shizune dodged and used all of her medical training to avoid being cornered or hit, but the office was small. There was only so much space to move in before she ran out. According to the reports, Pain's bodies were able to see what the other saw, eliminating any blind spot when they worked together. True enough, though only one of the bodies could move fully, the other with its chakra receptors was watching. Its eyes turned towards Shizune and the body fighting her. Still, she didn't fight him in public until it was absolutely necessary. She was beginning to seriously worry about her ability to maintain both her safety and keep Pain in the lab when the windows and door blew inward with simultaneous explosions that scatter papers and lab equipment. Several members of a NBU came out of the holes. Their attack was almost instantaneous, engaging Pain with taijutsu and ninjutsu. Any chakra attack was immediately absorbed by the body, but they quickly adjusted. Even outnumbered, though, Pain was able to fend off their attacks. The other body lay on the exam table, unable to fight but watched everything that happened in the room. Chakra attacks were useless, physical attacks next to useless, and their attempts to recapture the remaining body of Pain were going nowhere. Shizune moved to the side, sheet in hand to block the paralyzed body of Pain from seeing the fight. Then, for no apparent reason, Pain paused, turning his head toward a window. Normally, the gesture would be a sign that he was vulnerable and should be attacked. However, since Pain's other body was watching the room and everyone in it, the gesture was not a break in defense. A moment after looking toward the window, Pain moved. He bolted for the window, the most direct route to the outside world. There were two ANBU members coming from that way, but he dodged past them and killed one while avoiding the other. Shizune and the others moved to stop him, but by the time they got outside, he was gone into the night. "Find him," Shizune ordered. "Don't let him get into the main village. She picked out one of the closest ANBU members. Come with me to the hospital. We need to make sure Naruto and Juri are secure." Dusk had fallen to darkness by the time Conan finally made it out of the compound into the sweet, fresh breeze. Conan took a moment to catch her breath by hiding in an alley. Around her the night remained quiet and tense. There were no alarms, no shouting and running guards. So far her escape had gone unnoticed, or if it had been noticed it was being kept quiet at the moment. It took Conan a while to figure out where she was again. She was able to find the way back to the mirror without much trouble. If she wanted to escape, that was her best bet, before they fully sent out a search. Still, she hesitated and turned her head away from the bright lights of the village and toward the dark edges. She made a frown. Something was going on outside, and there was a hint of a strong chakra in the air. Conan shut her eyes and huddled in the darkest spot she could find. She slowed her heartbeat and stopped her body from shaking. She was tired, but she felt better now that she had been free of the chakra restraints for a while. Her reserves were still small, but she could work with what she had. She'd managed to steal some additional paper on her way out of the interrogation center. A few of the sheets were actual chakra paper, ready and able to take on her power with ease, but the rest was just normal paper forms, meant for filing and notes. It was more difficult to work with, but not impossible. Keeping in mind her control to preserve as much chakra as possible, Conan cast out, detecting that faint hint, seeking its origin, both location and source. Her eyes snapped open as she found it and realized whose chakra it was. The chakra belonged to the Kyuubi, which meant the Kyuubi and its vessel lay in that direction. It was insanity to think she would be able to capture the boy by herself. Undoubtedly there were guards there, standing over the boy and whatever it was he was doing out late at night. Plus, there would be reinforcements quick to hand from the village and none for her. Going after the Kyuubi could be giving up the freedom she had only just attained by walking into a no-win situation. However, Nagato needed that chakra to fulfill his plan, to achieve his dream, and Conan had long ago sworn to do whatever was necessary, face whatever the risks to help Nagato achieve his dream. Face set in grim determination, Conan turned away from the Hokage Tower and toward the Kyuubi's signature. At the very least she could take a look, see what opposition she would face and assess the situation. Then, if there was no hope for her retrieval of the Kyuubi, she would have intelligence to report back to Nagato. She just had to make sure she was not captured again. Traveling to the source took longer than she wanted, but she was unwilling to waste any chakra moving quickly while still maintaining her cover. Conan slowed even farther as she reached the origin of the Kyuubi's chakra. Taking cover in the shadows, she focused on the small group before her. There were only 4 shinobi besides the Kyuubi vessel, Kakashi, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and another Kunoichi. Not the force she had expected when she had first felt the Kyuubi's chakra. She would have expected better security, but they seemed to be out here covertly. This could be the perfect time to start a sealing technique in the dark, away from everyone else on the training grounds, with the Kyuubi's container as the center of attention and glowing chakra crystals on all sides. Looking closer, Conan realized that 2 of the shinobi with them were injured. Kakashi she recognized from the battle for the other Konoha. Conan doubted he was this world's Kakashi by the sheer amount of injuries and exhaustion evident in his stance. Still, that begged the question, how did he arrive here? He must have fallen through during their attempt to get the Kyuubi. It was unlikely but possible. Their spy had sent a message that Kakashi was investigating intelligence leaks, so it was conceivable that he would have tracked the destination and purpose of the messages down to the Hokage Tower in the other world. One Kakashi or the other, what mattered was the copy Nin appeared injured. Kakashi stood in the center of the seal with the Kyuubi vessel, not even participating in controlling the seal. Jiraiya was kneeling on one side of the seal. His hospital clothes and white bandages made it look like he was hurt, even though it was dark. Even injured, Jiraiya would be difficult to deal with. It would depend on how badly he had been hurt and how far recovered he was. Tsunade, however, would be impossible for Conan to handle on her own. Knelt on the other end of the seal, Tsunade appeared to be in perfect health, and even at her best Conan knew she would be little match for the Sannin medical expert. Conan didn't know the 4th and closest Kunoichi. The woman's back was turned and her face hidden, but the back was unrecognizable. Judging by the company, though, Conan would work under supposition that the unknown woman was skilled, possibly a student of Tsunade. Conan settled into a more comfortable position, deliberating on her options. She was in no shape to fight 2 of the 3 Sannin, even if one of them was injured. Kakashi, too, could become a problem, even though he was injured and worn from days of fighting. If he was the Kakashi from Conan's world, he was at least able to stand, which made him dangerous all the same. Then, there was the unknown Kunoichi. Conan had no way to determine her skill or preferred type of attack. There was also the matter of her escape if she did manage to lay hands on the Kyuubi. The group would most likely alert the village to Conan's presence and make it nigh impossible to get to the Hokage Tower and through the glass. By all rights, she should head back, get home and report to Nagato. And yet, Conan honestly couldn't think of another time the Kyuubi would be so loosely guarded. 2 of the 4 shinobi currently guarding the Kyuubi were injured. Then, while Conan was also far from her best, the group before her seemed completely focused on the sealing technique they were attempting at the moment. The fact that they hadn't noticed or done anything about Conan yet meant that either their full attention was focused on the seal or they couldn't break away to deal with her. If that was true, then the only one she would have to worry about would be Kakashi. Taking into consideration their original strength and their respective injuries, they were probably evenly matched. It might even be better for Conan. It was a risky move. Even if Conan didn't get caught off guard, he would lose if any of the 3 people who were focusing on the seal were able to break away from the technique. She would be recaptured, or worse, killed, and any chance to relay information to Nagato would be lost. However, it could very well be the last chance to get the Kyuubi and the invaluable chakra it possessed. Without the Kyuubi, Nagato's plan would fail. It was as simple as that, and Conan was not willing to give up on Nagato's dream. So, that was her answer. Whether it was foolish or not, Conan was not willing to let her friend lose this chance. She took one last look at her supplies and gave herself a moment to get ready. Then she waited for the right time to attack. Kakashi thought as he looked around at the glowing chakra crystals that they had taken on more than they could handle. They had only been doing it for 20 minutes, or at most 30 minutes, but some of the crystals were already shining brighter than when they were absorbing chakra from healers. So far none of the chakra had leaked through to Naruto. The barrier and the crystals had done a good job capturing the latent Kyuubi chakra and funneling it in the containers. The catch was falling for them, but every time Kakashi sneaked a look at the thick red chakra hanging around the barrier, he couldn't find any sign that the amount of chakra was going down. If anything, the red cloud had grown, climbing up the walls of the barrier until they were almost buried in it. Kakashi reached down and absently rubbed circles into Naruto's back. It was good that the boy couldn't see the chakra, because Naruto was already scared enough without seeing the red power coming at him from every direction. The boy looked up at Kakashi and smiled, but his face didn't look as happy as it usually did. Instead, there were nervous cracks and his eyes kept moving. "Is it working right?" Naruto asked in a quiet voice that was hard to hear over the wind. His eyes moved from Kakashi to Tsunade's grim concentration, to Rin's determined frown, and then to Jiraiya's pale, panting concentration. "It's working right now," Kakashi agreed, kneeling down on the grass next to Naruto. The movement was stiff and hurt, but it was worth it to be able to sit down. "But this is tricky, hard work, and we need to give them time to focus." Naruto nodded and turned back to the seal and the chakra crystals that were lying on the grass. He fiddled with his hands and squirmed on his feet, already tired of standing still. Kakashi smiled. Naruto was trying, but he was never one to sit still for long. Too much energy trapped inside too small a body. Part of Kakashi was curious on how much it would affect Naruto's energy levels to have a whole second Kyuubi trapped inside him. But Kakashi recoiled at the thought even as it entered into his mind. One Kyuubi was strong enough. Who knew what it would do to the seal to have twice that much power trapped behind it? The outcome could very well be disastrous for both Naruto and the village. Kakashi eyed the outermost row of chakra crystals. They shined so brightly that they lit up the area like electric lights, like a beacon calling for people to look at it. He just hoped no one came around asking awkward questions drawn by the light. He closed his eyes and looked around to make sure no one was getting interested. When Kakashi opened his eyes, he threw himself in front of Naruto just as the kunoichi came out. He pulled out a kunai just in time to cross with hers. Kakashi yelled at the woman, "You," because he remembered her from the siege of Konoha. He struck back, hit air as she leapt away from him. "Conan!" Jiraiya exclaimed, half surprised gasp, half disappointed reprimand. "What are you doing and why are you doing it?" The woman, Conan, didn't answer Jiraiya's questions and instead went around Kakashi to get by him. Both he and she were slow. Both of them had been through a tough time recently. He could see the wounds on her exposed limbs and hear how tired she was by the way she breathed. Both their chakra and physical strength were low. Kakashi had been in competitions like this before, and the winner was always the person who wanted it more. The person who gave up first was always the loser. Kakashi was not going to lose. "Kakashi-Nisan," she's Naruto called. Kakashi told Naruto, "Stay behind me and stay in the seal." This cut off anything Naruto was about to say. Again, Conan moved around, which made Kakashi trip as he tried to stop her. She was too tired to use Kakashi's tired steps to her advantage. Something collided into his side, making Kakashi glance down at the explosive tag that had stuck itself to him. He tore off the tag and threw it to the side as it blew up. Several of the chakra crystals close by were moved by the explosion, which made their steady glow waver at the force. When an explosion happened so close to him, it pushed him back a few feet and hurt his side, but he got up and stopped her from getting to Naruto. Kakashi took a quick look at Jiraiya and Rin to see how hard the battle was making it for them to control the seal well. Jiraiya's breath was ragged and had bits of blood in it as he put his whole body into sealing the Kyuubi's chakra. "Kakashi, you have to get her out of here," Tsunade said with a sharp voice and a furious look. "She'll throw off balance the crystals fighting inside the seal. Move her out of the seal." "Naruto, put those crystals back in place, but stay in the seal while you do it." Kakashi nodded and took a big breath in. From where he stood, he could see Naruto scrambling to his feet and over to the crystals. The explosion had also thrown Naruto to the edge of the seal. Kakashi moved forward and struck as fast as his tired, sore muscles would let him, and then just a little bit faster as he moved himself and Conan to stay between her and Naruto. Due to his low chakra level, taijutsu was the best way for him to attack, and in a small part of his mind, he thanked Guy for always making him spar. Conan's initial use of chakra to control the explosive tag and then launching several paper shurikens at him during her counter-attacks had drained more of her energy early in the fight, but the explosion that caught Kakashi had also done damage to him. Kakashi got Conan off guard by feinting to the left and then turning to the right. He then pushed his body into her and forced her out of the seal. He then used his kunai to stab down, hitting his own leg but hitting most of it in hers. She answered by throwing another explosive tag between them and setting it off close by. Both of them were thrown back by the explosion, and it took Kakashi a few yards to get back on his feet. He was panting, and his chest burned. He was also bleeding because the blast had opened up the wound that Pain had given him in the last battle. Conan hadn't fared much better. She had a deep gash to the head and burns down her arms in addition to the stab wound to her leg. She had a wall of paper around her torso to protect it, but after the blast, it was burned and falling apart, and the white pallor of her face showed how much energy she had lost. They stared at one another for a moment, each trying to regain their breath and rally for the next exchange when a figure dropped between them. Kakashi's stomach dropped when he saw that the person with red hair and piercings was one of the AIM invasion unit. The body must have reanimated and escaped from the lab when the portal was opened. The chakra receptors in one arm were gone, leaving the arm hanging and useless, but the rest of the body seemed to work fine. Kakashi, who was cursing, rushed to get between the two AIM shinobi and the seal. He had no chance of stopping them on his own. Fighting a tired Conan was one thing, but fighting one of Pain's bodies, Kakashi would quickly lose. Kakashi was lucky that he didn't have to because Jiraiya spoke up as soon as he put himself in a defensive position. Well, Nagato, I guess this is where I find out how far you've really fallen. Jiraiya's voice was harsh and loud in the now quiet training field, even though it was muffled by his heavy breathing and bitter disappointment. Our reinforcements are on their way. You can try to take Naruto, but you won't manage it before they get here, and Conan is in no shape to escape on her own. So the question is, what's more important to you, the Kyuubi or your friend? Pain took one last look at Naruto before turning to Conan, lifting her up with his one good arm and disappearing toward the tower. Kakashi sagged in relief. In the clearing, more figures fell, but they were all of the Konoha ANBU, with Shikaku in the lead. Pain just left with Conan, said Kakashi, so the other three could work on sealing. They are on their way to the mirror. Shikaku nodded and pointed to the rest of his group, saying, after them. He moved closer as the ANBU ran off into the shadows, looking at the seal, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Rin around it, and Naruto inside. I'm going to assume that the Hokage doesn't know what you're doing right now. Kakashi sighed, expression turning into a grimace as his pains began to reawaken with the adrenaline draining from his system. No, he doesn't, but it's necessary, I can tell you that. The cat was out of the bag, but Minato was going to find out anyway. And related to the Kyuubi, Shikaku said as he looked around the clearing with a calculating expression. Shikaku would have to know about the Kyuubi and Naruto being a Jinchuriki. The Kyuubi's chakra was so strong in the clearing that even a normal person would have noticed it. Kakashi shook his head, but then stopped because it hurt his head and made him feel even more dizzy. When Minato-sensei comes back, we'll tell you everything, Kakashi begged. Just let us finish this. Shikaku took one last look at Jiraiya, then Tsunade, and then Naruto, who was standing in the middle of the seal with his eyes wide open. Alright, but I'm sending someone over skilled in sealing chakra in case anything goes wrong. As Shikaku followed the ANBU unit to the tower, Kakashi gave him a final nod and said, thank you. Kakashi managed to smile at Naruto as he hobbled back to the seal. He was about to tell Naruto that things were probably fine now, as long as the sealing went well, when the first crystal cracked and broke.
So that's it for today. I will continue this story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.